Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was the bodyguard of Azula. Naruto is banished from Konoha, but gives them the slip and boards a ship. Soon after, he is shipwrecked on Ember Island and is saved by Azula. 3 years later, Naruto is Azula's bodyguard while she hunts for the Avatar, but did he see the last of Konoha? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 71, Looking and Battling. Location, Team Paragon and Team Avatar. They had separated into 3 groups, the people who traveled on Appa, the people who traveled on Fan Ing, the dragon and the flying bison, as well as Momo, had come along for the surprise, and the people who were walking alongside Nyla. They were on their way to the possible location of the mountain's graveyard. While they weren't traveling with anyone else, Tsunade had told them a team of shinobi would be following and provide additional support until more backup, i.e. the majority of Konoha's shinobi force, arrived. Since they were going to the possible headquarters of the Akatsuki, chances were not being taken. Any luck? Aang asked June as he brought Appa down to a level where they could hear each other. He was still a little nervous to be around the bounty hunter, mostly because he didn't want to get punched like that again. No. She answered shortly, trying to stay focused on handling Nyla. The Shirsha shared his mistress' dislike for the airbender. The difference was he was more inclined to act on it. He looked over at Sokka and Akela, who were on the ground along with June and Nyla. "What about you, Sokka?" he asked. "Aang, if June and Nyla don't have his scent, what makes you think we have it?" The tribesman asked, his sarcasm coming out in full force. As they headed for the mountain's graveyard, they were also looking for Naruto, figuring that he would have come this way. But so far, they were having no luck. "I was just asking," he replied a little defensively. He urged Appa back higher into the air, not wanting to continue the conversation. "Let me guess, they're having no luck?" Zuko asked. "Really?" Both he and Azula were riding Fan Ing. Everyone else sat in Appa's saddle, some simply lounged and some were keeping an eye out for anything that told them that Naruto had been there. So far, there was nothing. "What do you think?" Toph asked, speaking before Aang did. "Besides, I thought we were heading somewhere, not looking for the resident pain in the ass." "You're going to have to be a little more specific than that, Toph," Suki told her. The Kyoshi warrior was wearing her full gear, including the face paint. But there was a small smile on her face as she spoke those words. "We have many pains in the ass." "I'm talking about Naruto, duh," the blind earthbender said with a roll of her eyes, exaggerating it just to show off the fact that she was blind. "Who else would I be talking about?" Don't you dare answer that question, Suki," Azula ordered from where she sat on the back of Fan Ing, her face set in a warning scowl. Suki could only laugh when she saw that scowl. "All right, I won't," she replied, easing back against the side of the saddle. "The spirits know I don't need a lightning bolt from you when you're like this." "Like what?" she demanded. "You're always like this when Naruto leaves without letting you know. You start getting snappish and irritated at the smallest thing. And if it goes on long enough, you'll start looking for excuses to try setting one of us on fire." She pointed out the facts, using her fingers to list them off. "And when he finally does come back, you're torn between hitting him and kissing him. So currently, she's going to put him in a coma or take him right on the spot?" Zuko asked with a grin on his face. Azula tried hitting him upside the head, but he ducked before her fist made contact. "Pretty much," she agreed with an identical grin. "Nice to know that nothing's really changed after you guys left," Toph commented. Secretly, she had worried that they would be different when the two teams met again. While that was true in some aspects, enough was the same that she was glad. "Ask Toph if she managed to find someone," Sokka shouted from below. "Sokka wants to," his girlfriend began to repeat. "I heard him." The earthbender in question snapped before looking over the side of Appa. And it's none of your business, Sokka. She shouted down. Toph, he's on the other side. Katara told her gently. Oddly enough, no one said a word, mostly because they had gotten so used to the fact that things like that were going to happen with Toph. Hey, guys, can we talk about something? Aang asked, looking back from where he sat atop of Appa's head. What about? What about? Asked Zuko as he flew fanning in a little closer. About that ringing bell sound we all heard. About a day before they had left, everyone in Konoha felt the earth tremble as a bell ringing echoed in the air. When they heard that bell, everyone felt something. They weren't what that feeling was exactly, but they all felt that for some reason, they should be in awe. However, Aang felt something different. He felt an inkling of familiarity and fear. It was like he had known what the something was, and knew enough to be afraid. What's there to talk about? Toph asked back without a care. Sure, she felt humbled by the feeling, but she also moved past it. It had just been a brief feeling, there wasn't anything to talk about. I don't know. It's just... He tried to find the right words, but couldn't. It's just what, Aang? Katara asked her boyfriend, concern evident in her voice. He just shrugged his shoulders. He couldn't answer. Do I have to come up there and slug him again? June asked from beneath them, sounding hopeful. Aang shifted his focus back to flying when he heard that, a small look of fear on his face. No, you don't need to do that. He hurriedly shouted down at her. I'm just going to focus on flying. You do that. She replied. Location, Naruto. It had taken him 3 days since reaching the mainland from the land of whirlpools, but it turned out that the information he and his team had gotten turned out to be correct. I know you're there, Tobi. He shouted out loud as he stood in front of the mountain's graveyard. But are you going to come out, or am I going to have to drag you out? Well, he certainly is confident. A snarling voice spoke as the form of Zetsu rose out of the ground. The question is, will he be able to back that confidence? A second voice asked, the lips on the white side of Zetsu moving as it spoke. Where's Tobi? Naruto asked the creature in front of him, not backing down. As if to answer his demand, a hole appeared in the air, twisting around and around, seemingly spewing out air into the world. And out of the hole came the form of Tobi. You need not concern yourself, Naruto. The masked member of the Akatsuki said as he stood on the ground, facing the blonde. I am here. Have you come to give yourself to us? He snorted in derision. You wish. I'm just here to kill you, he declared as he reached into the pack. And to also give these back to you. He pulled a bundle of cloth and dropped it on the ground, making a large metal crash. Both Tobi and Zetsu stared at the bundle as it landed on the ground and inadvertently revealed its contents. 6 headbands with the symbol of Amagakure scratched across lay on the bundle. Some were specked with dried blood. The meaning was clear, Pain was dead. How is this possible? The snarling voice, seemingly coming from Zetsu, demanded. He made the mistake of coming after me when I was angry. Naruto answered, remembering how it ended. Flashback. The surrounding area had been damaged by the fight, short and brutal that it was. 5 of the 6 Pains lay dead around the place, their headbands already taken from them. All that was left was the spiky-haired Pain, who lay against the trunk of a tree, unable to move. How could this happen? He asked, staring up at the person who had defeated him. You can thank Jiraiya for it. Naruto answered, holding his Zanpakuto, back in its sealed state, in both hands. When he had noticed that the Pains were twitching, the bald Pain a bit more than the rest of them, he figured that something was going on with them. When the bald Pain began to spasm and make random movements, he remembered what Jiraiya had said about the poison. He connected the dots when he began to see the other Pains spasm as well, that they all shared the same chakra, and that chakra was now killing them. It was a huge factor in the the blonde's favor, helping him win the fight. Are you going to kill this Pain? The spiky-haired Pain asked, his eyes flickering down at himself. I've already killed the other 5, why would I stop with you? He asked back, raising his Zanpakuto into a stance that was ideal for stabbing. As he was about to make the killing thrust, a hail of paper shuriken flew at him, forcing him to leap back. When the hail died, Conan, who had been ordered to stay out of the fight, stood between the two. I guess you want to die too? The blonde asked, readying to fight again. But what happened instead surprised him. She fell to her knees and bowed her head, touching it to the ground. Please, let me take him home. She begged. Don't mutilate him like you did the others. The other Pains were missing limbs or even their heads, a sign to how vicious Naruto was when he fought against them. After a stunned moment of silence, he spoke. Why should I? He's already dying. She began. He's a puppet, why would you care? He asked, cutting her off. He remembered from Irika's lessons, on a rare day when he had been paying attention, that no 2 chakras had the same signature. If there was such a case, then one of the 2 people who had them was a puppet. He's more than a puppet to me. He's not Pain, he's Yahiko and Nagato. She shouted at him, raising her head to look him in the eye, her emotionless mask breaking. Conan, enough, the spiky-haired Pain ordered, his monotone voice never changing. She turned slightly to look back at him, a tear glistening in the corner of her eye. Then she turned her head back to Naruto and bowed it again. Please, I'm begging you. Let me take him back. Let me care for them until they finally pass away. Silence ran paramount through the forest after she begged him for that favor. She kept her head bowed, not daring to look up. Finally, she heard the sound of his feet walking past her, a sound that filled her with despair, along with the sound of a sword being shifted in the hands that held it. The feet stopped walking and the few seconds that followed felt like a lifetime to her. But the sound that came next confused her, as it wasn't the sound of a head being decapitated. It was the sound of a cloth being cut. When it stopped, the feet started up again, only to stop when they sounded like they were directly in front of her. She raised her head and saw that they were in front of her, making her look up all the way to his face. For the sake of the sensei who taught us both, I am willing to be merciful. Naruto began. I will grant you your wish. You may take that Pain back to Amigakure and care for it and its puppet master until they died. But let me be very clear about this. He lowered himself so that they were eye to eye. You will never leave Amigakure again. If I hear a single whisper of a rumor that you have done so, I will find you, and I will kill you. Are we clear? She said nothing in response. She only nodded her head in agreement. He stood back up and walked away, leaping into the surrounding forest and leaving them behind. End flashback. Tobi looked from the bundle back up to Naruto. Most impressive, Naruto, he finally said, keeping a neutral tone in his voice. It seems that I was mistaken in believing you would surrender yourself when we met again. If you wanted that to happen, you shouldn't have killed Jiraiya, or sent Pain after me for a 3rd time. He replied shortly, gripping the Zanpakuto at his side a little tighter. I did not give any such orders to Pain. It was likely that he was acting on his own for the benefit of this organization. But that does not matter now. He shrugged his shoulders. I suppose this is where we start this fight you want so much? Not just yet. The blonde held his hand up in a stopping gesture. There is one more thing. And what is that? Kakashi wanted me to give these to you. He pulled out the goggles he had been carrying since he left the village and tossed them at the masked shinobi. He caught them with ease. For a moment of silence, he just stared at them. So he discovered the truth, did he? He asked himself, rubbing a thumb against the glass. Tell me, Naruto. Did Kakashi tell you who I was when he gave these to you? He asked the blonde, looking at him. All he said that he knew you once. He answered shortly. That would be true, and so have you. You lie. he instantly said. He knew that he had never met Tobi before the mission to the capital. I do not. We met before. Granted, you were a newborn and I was threatening to kill you so I could get a hold of your mother, but the fact remains. The masked shinobi said causally, like he was talking about something that didn't really matter. What? Oh? They didn't tell you that your mother was the previous Jinchuriki of the Kyubi? He asked, almost sounding like he was disappointed. The fox told me that. The blonde answered him, still not believing a word of what he said. Did he also tell you that I was the one extracted him from your mother and set him on Konoha? He asked again. That, he did not. Naruto answered honestly. Why did you not tell me this, furball? He mentally asked the Kyubi. That night is still a bit of a blur for me, Kit. The biju answered. 1 minute, I'm sealed inside your mother. The next thing I know, there are a couple blurry images, some screaming, and before I know it, I'm sealed inside you. I thought he hadn't. Tobi continued, ignorant of the conversation the biju and Jinchuriki just had. But it still happened. You could almost say that I am the reason you are a Jinchuriki, Naruto. A dark chuckle escaped from behind the mask. I wonder what my old sensei would have said if he had known that before he died. Then again, I also wonder what he would say if he knew who he had been fighting that. He was silent for a moment before shrugging his shoulders carelessly. It doesn't matter. As for your fight, Naruto, I'm afraid that I must decline. He turned his back and started walking away. Zetsu, take him alive. You got it. Both voices said in unison, leaping for the blonde. The masked shinobi kept on walking, until he heard the sound of two bodies hitting the ground with a meaty thud. He stopped and looked back. Zetsu had been bisected and Naruto stood over the two pieces, the sword drawn and dripping blood. Seriously? Asked the blonde. That's all you were going to have me fight? He flicked the blood off of his sword, splattering it on the ground in an arc before sheathing it. When Tobi looked upon the blade, he was suddenly reminded of the day he heard that sound of a bell ringing in the air that soon faded into an echo. Whatever he felt was eclipsed by what he saw. The Geto Mazo had opened all its eyes and howled into the air. It had raised all the hair he had, and the unnerving thing? The howl sounded like a challenge to the bell. Perhaps it was rather rude of me to think capturing you would be that easy. The masked shinobi admitted, slipping his hands into a hand seal. Thankfully, I have a backup. The ground seemed to quake for a moment. Then, once it had stopped, creatures began to rise up from the ground. They turned out to be copies of Zetsu, with the major differences being they were completely white and had none of the Venus flytrap the original had. Don't kill him, we need him alive. He ordered the army of Zetsu clones before turning back around and leaving. As the clones began to move forward and encircle the blonde, he only smirked in response. That wouldn't be a good idea. He told them. If I were you all, I would turn around and walk away. And why we should? One of the clones in the front asked him. It's clear that we have the advantage over you. That would be quantity or quality, and personally, I always believed that a healthy mixture of both will trump either one of them. He replied as he shifted the pack off of his back, letting it hit the ground. It would have been extra weight soon, and he didn't need it. He pulled his Zanpakuto out, sheath and all, and held it out in front of him. The expression on his face went flat as he grasped the hilt. Shatter the chains that bind you and stand in defiance against those who would shackle you. He intoned as he slowly drew the Zanpakuto out. Jinchuriki. As the blade was about to clear the sheath, the entire thing morphed. Instead of a sword, he now held a naginata. Its shaft was made of black wood that had both ends of the pole capped in gold. Attached to one end of the pole was the figure of an orange fox's head, mouth agape, and almost carved as a snarl. Protruding from its mouth the blade was the blade of the weapon, having a curved edge. Pierced in through the bottom of the blade, so they hung around the fox's lower jaw, were 9 golden rings. But Naruto didn't stop there. While still holding the halberd, he crossed his fingers into a familiar hand seal, and said Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 8 copies came into existence, carrying the same weapon. The difference was that instead of having a fox's head and 9 rings, the other 8 each had a different head that represented a biju, and the rings that corresponded to the number of tails it had. From the figure of a tanuki's head, and its 1 ring to the figure of a bull's head, and its 8 rings. Despite the fact that they all felt the same feeling of uncertainty and unease when looking at the transformed weapon, one of Zetsu scoffed. Is that supposed to fright? It began to ask with a sneer on its face, only to have it turn to shock when a bolt of lightning punched a hole through its chest and causing it to collapse to the ground, dead. The rest of the clones looked in the direction where the bolt originated and saw the Naginata with the bull's head had lightning crackling at its tip. Yes. The original Naruto simply answered as the other 7 Naginatas came alive. The first had sand float around the blade. The second blade was wreathed in blue fire. The third blade was encased in water. The fourth blade had a ring of lava circling it. The fifth blade had small rocks orbiting it. The sixth blade had what looked to be slime glistening down in rivulets. And the seventh blade had a cone of spiraling air cocooned around it. Out of all them, only the 9th blade, the one which the original held, had nothing. The 8 clones leveled their version of the Zanpakuto and attacked while the original just stood there and watched in silence. Despite the clear numerical advantage the clones had, it was soon rendered moot by the way the clones fought. Some of them were graceful, looking like they were dancing, and some were crude, more direct, and to the point. But all of them were vicious and deadly, and the elements they bore added to the effect. Even with more and more Zetsu clones rising from the ground, whole swaths were demolished. Some choked to death as the sand filled through their throats while others suffocated when the air was pulled out of them. What seemed to be slime on the Naginata with the figure of a slug's head turned out to be acid, and was quite corrosive, if how the wounds inflicted on the clones and their screams were anything to go by. Both the blue fire and the lava killed several of the clones, burning them alive. The Naginata with the figure of a dolphin horse had crushed several clones' heads with boulders and also sent them falling into fissures formed when the blade struck the earth. And the lightning from the 8th version electrocuted clones, killing them in an instant. Tobi, who had stopped in front of the entrance to the caves and had turned back around at the sounds of fighting, just watched. He didn't do anything or say anything. He just observed how the massive clone army he had been preparing ever since the Akatsuki had captured their first Jinchuriki getting torn to shreds. Are you afraid to fight for yourself, Naruto? He asked, finally breaking his silence. I am fighting. The clone holding the 7th version answered, spinning the Naginata around and around, sending clones flying into the air from the wind created by the spinning. I mean the original you. The one who hasn't moved since this fight has begun. He clarified, gesturing to the original Naruto, who hadn't moved from the spot he stood on, holding the Naginata like it was a staff. Every time a Zetsu clone tried to get to him, one of the copies would double back and stopped it, while he acted nothing happened. They seemed to be doing just fine. The original stated, looking at his clones. The reinforcements the Zetsu clones had been getting slower until it had finally stopped. The rest of the clones were being taken care of. But perhaps you're right. I think the number has been whittled down enough. His clones disappeared in plumes of smoke, leaving him alone against the remnants of the Zetsu clones. Ha, that was a mistake you're going to regret making. One of the clones told him in a triumphant voice. I wouldn't be so sure of that. He relied, casually lower the Naginata until its tip was pointing directly at them. You've seen what the other versions can do, but you haven't seen what this version. The Kyubi is the strongest of the 9 biju. Would you like to know what element was chosen to represent him? What? Another clone asked. Energy, he answered with an almost feral grin as the blade seemed to pulse and turn to a reddish color, almost the same color of the fox's chakra. Pure. Unrefined. Power. He leapt for the clones, swinging the Naginata. What happened next was completely different from before. However crude or graceful the previous versions were, there was a sense of style to them. There was no style to how he wielded the Naginata. He swung it like it was a club. But the effect was the same. Wherever the club was swung, the Zetsu clones were sent flying back or mere plowed over, crushed by the massive force that was bent from the Naginata. Whole chunks of the clones were destroyed just being struck. Run for your life. One of the outermost clones screamed, as the fringes began to run away. But that particular clone was beheaded by Tobi, who wielded a sickle in his right hand that had a chain attached to the bottom of its shaft. You will fight, or you will die. The masked shinobi ordered the rest of the Zetsu clones, taking hold of the chain and began to swing the sickle. It's your choice. That's hardly a choice. Another clone protested. But before Tobi could decapitate that one, it was crushed by the force, head bursting as it fell to the ground. I happened to be talking to that one, Naruto. The Akatsuki member said aloud, looking at the carnage. It's rather rude to kill someone when they're in the middle of a conversation. Like he actually cares about something like that. The blonde mentally said in derision as he swung the Naginata again, sending a group of Zetsu clones flying through the air. The remaining clones were getting fewer and fewer as he kept on destroying them. Some tried to fight back, a few fusing together to make a bigger, mutated version. But Naruto's response was to put truth in the old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Moving the Naginata in a thrusting position, he sent the mutated version flying through the air, its chest crushed instantly. As it slammed into the ground, it broke apart into bloody pieces. Gruesome. Gruesome. The QB idly commented. Your color commentary is not needed right now. His Jinchuriki told him before refocusing on the fight. The rest of the Zetsu clones fought with a desperate energy, trying to surround him and take him down all at the same time. That was their fatal mistake. He simply swung his weapon in a circle, and they were all crushed by the pressure of the force. He was known alone. Looking over at where Tobi had supposedly been standing, he saw that the masked shinobi was now gone. Not wanting to let him get away, the blonde charged directly into the entrance to the caves. Get back here, Tobi. He shouted into the semi-darkness, running through it. I'm not going anywhere, Naruto. Tobi's voice echoed around him as chakra lanterns illuminated the area. It showed the shinobi standing in front of the statue that could only be the Geto Mazo. The sickle was still in his right hand. I just figured we needed more room. How considerate of you, the blonde replied sarcastically. A quiet chuckle escaped from the mask. My old sensei also had a sense of sarcasm, although it wasn't as sharp as yours. He used it more to poke gentle fun at others. You keep talking about your sensei like I should have known him. He noted, staring at the orange mask like he was trying to will it to reveal its secrets. You would have, had I not deprived you of the chance. Tobi answered. Well, I should say the QB deprived you of the chance, but I released it in the first place. So, I deprived you. He suddenly laughed when he saw the frown on Naruto's face. That's the same frown he wore whenever he had to separate me and Kakashi when we came to blows. Multiple things clicked into place at those words. A vague memory came to mind, becoming clearer and sharper as he remembered. It was a memory of before Sasuke had tried to run away, when he was a member of Team Kakashi. One of them, he forgot who exactly, had asked Kakashi how he got the Sharingan for a left eye, and he told them the story. You're him, aren't you? He asked aloud. You're the person Hitaki's left eye belongs to. You used to be his teammate. You're Obito Uchiha. Whatever laughter he had left vanished when he heard those words. Nothing but silence ran rampart through the cave for a good 2 minutes before he finally spoke. Kakashi told you the story. He stated, not asking a question. He did, a few years ago. The Fire Paragon replied. You look quite alive for a dead man. And I thought you would ask why I hadn't returned to the village. He idly commented. If I was loyal to the village, I might have. But I'm not, so I won't. The question I have is that now I know who you are you still going to keep wearing that mask? Again, he was silent. But he released his grip on the sickle, reached up, and pulled the mask off. The right side of his face was scarred in such a way that it looked heavily wrinkled. It was the only thing that visibly showed what happened to that side of his body. Other than that, he looked normal, even though his skin was a bit pale. What had surprised Naruto was that his left eye wasn't an empty socket. There was a Sharingan in it as well. Like what you see? The unmasked Uchiha asked him. Whose eye is that? Naruto asked, pointing at the left eye with the Naginata. It doesn't matter. Just like my name doesn't matter, despite what you might think. He stated, chucking the mask away and grabbing the chain attached to the sickle. Obito does not exist anymore. Is that right? Yes, it is. Then why are you still holding the goggles? The Naginata shifted its tip to the goggles held in his left hand. He looked down at them and saw that his thumb had been idly rubbing the lens. Wordlessly, he dropped them to the ground and stepped on them. The glass cracking was the answer he gave. He began to spin the sickle around and around. When he charged at Naruto, he swung the chain, sending the sickle flying at the blonde. The Naginata shifted into the 7th version. Naruto spun it around, bending a shield of air that the sickle bounced off of harmlessly. While still moving the Zanpakuto, he caused it to shift into the 2nd version and bent an arc of blue fire at his opponent. When Obito went through the fire, phasing past the fire and the heat, he shifted the Naginata into the 5th version and struck the ground, bending up a small barrier of earth to protect him from his opponent. Is that supposed to stop me, Naruto? Obito asked as he threw the sickle around the barrier from one side and letting it hit the other while moving through the earth. He saw that the blonde had kept the chain from restricting him by using the shaft of his Naginata. However, that caused him to turn his back to the barrier. I have him. The Akatsuki member thought in triumph as he reached out and grabbed the blonde's shoulder, only to have it disappear in a cloud of smoke. Akage Bunshin? Was the silent but surprised question he asked. On instinct, he stayed intangible. That instinct saved him as Naruto descended from above with the Naginata in the 8th version. He tried to pierce the former Uchiha with a lightning-encased tip, only to go through him and hit the ground, causing web-like cracks to be created. Once he realized that it didn't work, he rolled out of Obito and shifting the Zanpakuto into the 4th version, encased him in a cooling cocoon of lava. Please tell me that got him. He mentally prayed. I think you know the answer to that. The fox said in reply. Again, color commentary, not needed now. He snapped back as he stood up from his crouch position. For a second, he had hoped to think that it had worked, only to have that hope dashed when Obito walked through the cooling lava. He didn't say anything. He charged at Naruto again, sickle in hand. Shifting the Zanpakuto into the 6th version, the blonde met him, crashing his weapon against the sickle. He almost lost his balance when the Zanpakuto suddenly went through the sickle and its wielder, taking him with it. But he stopped by thrusting the blade of the Naginata into the ground. Bringing the rest of his body out of his opponent, which felt a little weird, he quickly whipped them back across and managed to knock Obito to the ground. Trying to take advantage of what happened, he pulled the Zanpakuto out of the ground and swung down at the Akatsuki member, bringing a trail of corrosive acid with it. But it again struck ground, as Obito seemingly melted through the ground. Where'd he go? Naruto silently demanded as he looked around, trying to keep an alert lookout. Does it look like I know? The Kyuubi asked him. For the love of everything holy and sacred underneath the gaze of Kami, will you stop talking? He bellowed inside his mind at the biju, his anger flaring. Ah, you don't need to shout. The fox complained, wincing as the roar kept ringing in his ears. Fine, I'll stop talking. Thank you. By the way, look down. What? He did look down and saw Obito's hand coming out of the ground into him. He tried to get back, but the hand was too fast and grabbed hold of his upper leg. I would have thought Kakashi would have taught you to remember to look down. Obito commented as he came out of the ground. It was a mistake that has cost you. I win. The air began to distort itself around his right eye, drawing towards it. Unable to do anything, the blonde was sucked into the distortion, disappearing into the eye. As he captured Naruto, the Akatsuki member noticed the smile on his face, and saw him mouth the words "think again." A little confused by that, as his Sharingan was able to read lips perfectly, he wondered what that meant. There's nothing he can do now, I have him. He thought to himself. Then he realized something. Unless, he didn't make just one Kage Bunshin. A blaze of blue fire sailing through the air and towards answered that question. He tried to suck the fire into his eye, only to be surprised to see it move out of the path of his eye while still in the air. He tried to get out of its path, but was only partly successful as it grazed his left arm and gave him a burn. He did teach me to always look down. Naruto's voice answered him as the blonde walked back into his view, the Naginata in his hands being in its second version. I was counting on you to do the same thing. You wanted one of those clones to be touched by me. He accused his opponent, his breath coming out in a hiss due to the burn. You must go somewhere when you disappear, and I bet it has something to do with that right eye of yours. So, I let you take a clone, just to see where he would end up. He calmed himself down and looked at the blonde. Nothing showed on his face and neither did his eyes. You are becoming an annoyance, he declared. I'll take that as a compliment. The blonde replied, shifting the Zanpakuto into the fifth version and sending rocks flying at him. He simply stood there and let the rocks fly through him. But he did flinch and grabbed his shoulder as blood leaked fast down his hand. That's weird. All the rocks went right through him. Naruto noted. Katan, Gokaku no Jutsu, shouted Obito as he flipped through hand seals and breathed out a fireball. It went flying towards Naruto. But he blocked it by shifting his Zanpakuto into the third version and bending a shield of water against the fireball. Thrusting the Naginata forward once the fireball had dissipated, he bent the water into a torrent and sent it straight at Obito. It went right through him, even as the blonde kept it up and made it bigger, until it covered all of him. When he tried to move away from the water, Naruto stayed with him. When he finally let it stop, Obito didn't look any worse for the wear, except for the fact that his cloak had multiple cuts in it. The water didn't do that. Naruto thought to himself. So, what did? As if to answer the question, memories began to flood his mind. He winced at first, but he smiled. I've got you now, he declared in silent triumph. Obito, not being one to wait, swung the sickle at him again. This time, he tried something different. Ducking to avoid the sickle itself, he reached out, grabbed hold of the chain. He pulled hard enough to send his opponent flying. And he did. Obito hadn't expected the chain to be grabbed or for it to be pulled. He was lifted up into the air and sent flying. When he saw the Naginata pointing straight at him, he had no choice. He allowed himself to pass through the Naginata and through. But even as he passed through them and touched the ground safely, he let out a scream of pain and covered his left eye. There was a deep enough of a gash through the eye itself to render it useless and making him blind on his left side. I guess that means it worked. He heard Naruto speak from behind him. What do you mean? He demanded, spinning around to look at the blonde. Blood oozed between his fingers as he continued to hold his eye. I figured out how that little intangible trick of your works. You don't turn intangible at all, do you? You just move your body to a different dimension. The blonde accused him. He briefly wondered how his opponent knew that. Then he realized that the clone had kept attacking him whenever he had slipped into the other dimension. It was why he kept moving around when the torrent of water was striking him. He was trying to avoid the attacks of the clone. It didn't really work, if the cuts on his cloak were anything to go by. You certainly do know how to use clones. he commented. "They're what got me to become a shinobi." Naruto replied. "And now, you can't try to phase through me or my attacks, otherwise you'll be attacked by my clone in the other dimension. The playing field has been leveled." He was silent for a moment. Then he took off the cloak of the Akatsuki, not caring if it was being torn in the process, and dropped it onto the floor. "Very well, Naruto," he said as he unwrapped the chain the sickle was attached to. It had been wrapped around his waist. "If you wish to fight on a so-called leveled playing field, I shall indulge you." He began to swing the sickle and the end of the chain around and around. "But do not think that just because you can hit me, it means I am any less dangerous." The blonde's reply was to shift his Zanpakuto into the first version and try to cover him in sand. He leapt high and swung the sickle down. Naruto bent the sand into a shield, stopping the sickle. But as he dropped it, Obito came in with a flying kick. It caught him square in the chest, making him fall down to the ground loudly. As he regained his bearings, he saw the sickle coming down. He wasn't sure where it was going to strike, but he didn't know if Obito simply wanted to contain him or try to kill him now. Not wanting to find out, he shifted his Zanpakuto into the seventh version and managed to knock the sickle aside. He saw the end of the chain swinging in and rolled out of the way, letting it strike the ground. Standing up and shifting his Zanpakuto into the sixth version, he swung high, corrosive acid glistening on the blade. Obito saw the incoming strike before it happened and quickly sidestepped, allowing it to hit the ground. Sickle in hand, he swung for the blonde's shoulder, intent on disabling him. Naruto saw the sickle incoming. Taking one hand off of his weapon, he quickly pulled out a kunai and blocked it. Sparks flew off of the two blades as they grated against each other. The fight stalled as the two combatants tried to push through the other's defense. That is, until they both tried to kick the feet out from under the other. Their kicks met in midair and the air around them resounded with the sound of them meeting. They broke off and leapt back away from each other. "Futon, Shinken," Naruto said, doing the hand seals while his hands were full, thus making take a little longer. He breathed the wind onto the kunai, sharpening it and lengthening it as well. Once it was ready, he threw it straight at Obito. The member of the Akatsuki took hold of the middle section of the chain and held it out in the path of the kunai. When metal struck metal, he twisted the chain off to the side, sending the kunai flying away. But it had cut through the chain itself, leaving him with only half the length. Not one to be deterred, Obito grabbed the shortened end of the chain and began to swing the sickle like a flail. He stepped towards Naruto, who shifted his Zanpakuto into the second version and began spinning it around, bending blue fire. He used the fire to try and keep his opponent away from him. The sickle was coming in hard and fast, whistling through the air, and seemingly cutting the arcs of blue flame in half. And yet, Obito was slow to press forward. He knew that the closer he got, the less room he had to use the sickle as a flail. Whilst his opponent wouldn't have such a problem, granted, he could grab the sickle by the handle when he got closer, but that would take precious seconds, and if he miscalculated, Naruto would press his advantage. The fire and the sickle continued to duel each other, their wielders always taking a step forward or a step back. It almost looked like they were dancing a very dangerous dance. Their faces were locked in equal expressions of concentration. Naruto finally took a chance after they had gone on like that for too long, at least, in his opinion. He shifted his Zanpakuto into the fourth version and swung high from below, lava trailing behind in an arc. While the blade didn't hit the sickle, the lava certainly did. It momentarily covered the sickle, and that was all the blonde needed. He bent the lava to cool, and then to slam into the ground. As it broke apart, so did the sickle with it. The metal shattered and the pieces skidded all across the ground. The shaft of the sickle was charred and looked half melted. When Obito pulled the chain back to him, half of the shaft broke off and stayed on the ground. He took off the other half and began swinging the chain again. He swung it at Naruto. Despite losing the sickle, it was still a weapon, and he was intent on using it. Naruto backed up as the chain swung in close, not letting it get close to him. Even without the sickle, the chain was a deadly weapon if used properly, and Obito knew how to use it properly. The whistling the chain made as it swung through the air was enough to pierce the ears of anyone who left them unprotected. But as the blonde had the goggles over his ears, it was enough to dull the sound. Shifting his Zanpakuto into the 6th version, he began to attack the chain, striking the end with corrosive acid. The sparks flew again as the Naginata and the chain struck each other. Link by link, the chain was slowly melting each time it was hit by the acid. But even though that was happening, Naruto was getting impatient. This is taking too long. He mentally growled as he knocked the chain away, corroding the next link away. Well, aren't you going to do something about it? The fox asked, half sarcastic and half serious. No. I just thought I would plan on where to take Azula out next time. He replied, completely sarcastic. When the chain swung at him again, he didn't knock it away. Instead, he ducked and let it pass over his head. As it curved back around, it used the Naginata's shaft to do so. Seeing his chance, Naruto stood back up and spun the Naginata, wrapping the chain around it. Then he yanked hard. Obito had no desire to go flying again, so he let go of the chain. As the chain flew straight at him, the blonde spun the Zanpakuto in the other direction, freeing the end of the chain on the shaft. Once it was done, he stepped off to the side and let it go right past him. He then shifted his Zanpakuto into the 9th version and stabbed the air, bending the force at the chain. The impact caused the chain to completely shatter, the fragments embedding themselves into the nearby floor and wall. Trying to press his advantage, Naruto charged straight at his opponent. However, Obito had thought of the same thing, now that both his sickle and chain had been destroyed. The two of them clashed again. Even though he was weaponless, Obito was a master at taijutsu, and still had a Sharingan to use. But the effect was only half as effective, due to the fact that his left eye had been all but destroyed, leading him to be blind on that side. Naruto kept trying to take advantage of that weakness by continually moving into that blind spot. Obito could still see him do it before he actually did because of his remaining Sharingan and reacted accordingly. He also prevented the blonde the full use of his Naginata by keeping close, and making him use it only for defense. As the fight went on, Naruto was beginning to tire. Continually usage of his Zanpakuto was wearing down on him. He was still unused to it, and that was becoming a liability. He needed to figure out a way to finish the fight. Your strikes are getting slower, Naruto. Obito noted as he threw a kick at the blonde's midsection. Are you getting tired? He blocked the kick with the Naginata's shaft. Don't think you can take me out easily. He replied with an almost growl. He tried using the other end of his Zanpakuto to knock the Uchiha's feet out from under him. I have never done so. The Akatsuki member replied, bringing his arm down to block the shaft. His opponent tried to take the opportunity to move into his blind side, but he followed with him. But you are tiring, I can see it in how you move and how you fight. I can still beat you. The blonde promised him. He couldn't help but laugh at that. Have you been deluding yourself into thinking that you could? He asked. I don't think. I know I can and will beat you. He swung the Naginata from high, trying to cleave Obito in two. But the man simply spun to the side, letting the blade strike the ground and cause a crater. You have been deluding yourself. The Akatsuki member said in quiet satisfaction. You actually thought that you could defeat me and claim victory. How incredibly naive of you, Naruto. He threw a punch that got through and struck the blonde's side. He hissed in pain as he felt the pain of the fist. That's probably going to crack one of my ribs. The fire paragon noted to himself. How is naivety to think I could beat you? He demanded, still continuing the fight. He tried to get past his opponent's guard, but nothing seemed to get through. Simple facts, Obito answered. You may have served in a war, I will grant you that. But so, I have. I have not survived this long because I was very lucky. I studied, I trained, and I learned. I am better than you, Naruto, both mentally and physical than you. You lack the experience or the training to actually have a chance against me. He dodged a jab from the Naginata. I don't believe that. You can't use your little trick to help you in this fight. Which I have admitted is quite impressive of you. But just because you've done one thing to me doesn't change the outcome. You thought you could win against me, but all you have actually done is just wear yourself down. He stated as he ducked under the Naginata's swipe. That's not true. I can beat you. He would beat his opponent. He had to beat his opponent. If he lost, leaving Konoha and his friends behind would have been completely pointless. He had to keep going to succeed in this fight. But even as the blows were parried and blocked, as the strikes and kicks kept coming and going, he began to feel more and more tired. His attacks were becoming slower and weaker. Obito saw this and took advantage. He lunged in and began a vicious assault. He didn't let up, he just kept the assault going. Naruto tried to defend himself against it, but when he had been forced to drop his Zanpakuto to catch a kick, that when it was over for him. He tried to keep his defense up, but it was torn apart by barrage of punches and kicks. Pain came at him from every part of his body each time he was struck. In the end, he wasn't sure what it was that finished him. Maybe it was the punch to the shoulder or the knee to his stomach. But he hit the ground face first. This fight is over. Obito declared, standing over him. As he laid there, his body in considerable pain and his mind almost overloading from that pain, he somehow heard those words. Over. He silently asked himself. No, it can't be over. I have to win. I have to beat him. Pushing past the pain, he reached out and grabbed his Zanpakuto. I have to win. He tried to stand up. It's over, Naruto. His opponent told him as he just watched. He refused to believe that. No, not done. He rasped as he forced himself to get on his knees. What was that? His opponent asked him. I am not done. He answered, lifting himself up into a kneeling position. Every muscle in his body ached as he did this, but he couldn't stop there. He reached for his chakra and felt it flicker. I didn't hear you. The Uchiha said with confusion evident on his face. I'm not done. He repeated, his chakra getting stronger and stronger. Its blue energy began to show itself over his body. I'm not done. He said again, letting his chakra flow through his body, and letting him forget the pain that riddled him. His refusal to stay down, his will to win, and basic desperation were enough to finally bring his chakra out in full force. As he stood up, he was bathed in a blue inferno. I'm not done. He roared into Obito's face. His chakra flared up in response to what he felt. It reached higher and higher as it began to look like creatures were trying to claw their way out. It soon became evident that those creatures were dragons, and when they did finally form themselves, taking all of the chakra off of the blonde, there were 9 of them looming over him. Having seen what came next, Obito tried to get to safety. But he couldn't turn himself intangible, he wasn't sure if the clone was still there waiting for him, so he tried to turn and run. But the first dragon had already lunged and grabbed hold of him. There was nothing he could do, he was trapped. Naruto leapt at his trapped target and began the barrage. 9 punches, 9 kicks and 9 strikes from his Zanpakuto he gave to Obito before the dragon tossed the trapped Uchiha for the next dragon to grab him. The blonde held nothing back, pouring everything he had into the barrage. His Zanpakuto shifted versions with each dragon, adding the element that they carried. When the 8th dragon had done its turn, it threw Obito up into the air. The 9th dragon flew up after him and encircled him, while Naruto leapt up and off of it to reach his target. He delivered 26 blows, flying through the air, and then leaping off of the dragon. For the 27th, he leapt into the air, flying higher and higher. Once he reached the zenith, he looked down at his target and drew back his fist. He began to fall towards Obito, channeling his chakra into his fist. Tenryutai no Hoko! He shouted, slamming his fist into the Uchiha's stomach. The chakra flowed through his fist, taking the form of the 10th and last dragon, whose majestic and regal look was the reason for the name. It clamped its teeth onto the Uchiha and flew straight at the ground, smashing into it. The sound of the crash reverberated throughout the cave. When Naruto landed on the ground, he found Obito lying in a very shallow crater, whether that because it was very hard rock underneath or he simply didn't have enough to make the 15-inch crater, the blonde didn't care at that point. He limped over to the fallen Uchiha, his chakra fading away. Once he stood over his opponent, he raised his Zanpakuto and stabbed the man in the heart. "Any last words?" he asked as he held the Naginata down. Obito was in pain, complete and utter pain. At some point in the barrage, he had been blinded in his right eye too. He knew he was dying, even before he felt the Naginata pierce his heart. But he felt his life fading away, and even though he should have only seen darkness, the last thing he could see was her. "Rin," he said, a whisper, trying to raise a hand to reach out to her. That whisper was his last, and that hand never rose. Once he was sure the man was dead, Naruto pulled his Zanpakuto out of Obito's chest. It morphed back into the form of a katana. He walked away from the body for a few steps before his legs gave away, and he fell to his knees. "I did it," he said in wonder, like he couldn't believe it. "I killed him. Everyone in the known Akatsuki is dead." For some reason, he began to laugh. "The job's done. We can go now. It's over." He almost couldn't believe the words, but they were true. He stayed there for a while, just relishing the fact that it was all over. When the pain began to fade away, he stood back up on shaky legs. "I guess it's time to leave," he said to himself, still trying to make sure he didn't fall down again. "You do realize that you're a dead man once Azula gets her hands on you," the Kyuubi pointed out. He smiled. "I know. I'm looking forward to it." That was when he felt the ground shake, almost making him lose his balance again. When he steadied himself, he looked around to see what had happened. When he looked upon the Geto Mazo, he saw that all the eyes were opened, but only 8 had pupils. Then he noticed that those 8 pupils were looking straight at him, and the arms were reaching for him. Chapter 72, Rampages and Ends. Location, Naruto. As he slowly came back to a conscious state of mind, he felt sluggish. What happened? He tried to ask himself. He felt like his brain was full of cobwebs. When he tried to open his eyes, it was like they wouldn't. When he was able to crack them open an inch, there was what felt like 2 spears trying to stab them. He instantly closed them again, regretting his decision. Bad idea, that was a bad idea. He chanted as he rocked back and forth. "Will you stop that, you fool?" A familiar voice asked him. "You look like you're cannonballing into a pool." When those words and that voice floated into his ears, he stopped rocking and slowly opened his eyes, trying carefully get used to the blinding light. When they finally adjusted, they widened in surprise at what was in front of him. He asked, not entirely believing it. But the Kumo shinobi was right there before him, both of them standing in a white void. Who else would it be? The Jinchuriki of the Hachibi asked back. "There's only one killer bee, and that would be me, the top cheese." "I thought you didn't like cheese," the voice of a woman commented as one appeared by his side. She wasn't taller than him, but she was able to look him in the eye without lifting her head. Her long blonde hair was held in a ponytail against her back. She wore a black and purple shirt as well as black pants. The headband of Kumogakure was somewhat hidden underneath her hair, but it was still visible. "Come on, Yujito. I was just trying to make a point, you know?" "Fool, you fool," he said to her. Her eyes went flat and hard at those words. "B, what have I told you about rapping or calling me a fool?" she asked with a tone of voice that promised something painful, if he didn't answer correctly. Which was why Naruto wasn't really surprised as he watched the Raikage brother be cowed. "That you would geld me with your nails if I did it again," he muttered, not wanting to maintain eye contact. He even flinched when his eyes gazed at her nails. "Glad to see you remembered," she replied easily enough. She looked over at Naruto, who was still staring at them both. "So, you're the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi," she stated, looking him over. Can't say I'm impressed." That snapped him out of his silence. "And who the hell are you again?" he asked her. "The name's Obito and I." She introduced herself. "I was the Jinchuriki of the Nibi." He looked at her closely. Can't say I'm impressed," he finally said, throwing her words right back at her. She gave a feral grin. "I think you and I will get along just fine. It took me 4 years and 12 rounds of ass whooping for you to say that to me," B said, almost sulkily. She threw him a vaguely annoyed look. "B, that was more than 18 years ago. Get over it," she told him. "I see you guys are having fun." A man's voice spoke. When Naruto looked over to his left, where the voice had come from, his eyes widened again. "You two are here as well?" he said in surprise, looking at the 2 Jinchuriki from IWA. "I am Han, he is Rashi," the taller of the 2 told him, gesturing first to himself, then to his companion. He was differently dressed than in the photo, but it was still the same person. "How do you know us, kid?" Rashi asked him with a slight frown on his face. "I saw a picture of you two with the Tsuchikage when I was in IWA. You're the Jinchuriki of the Yanbi, and he's the Jinchuriki of the Gobi," he answered, first pointing at the redhead and then at the tall man. "Yeah, well, that's not entirely true," the redhead muttered. Before Naruto could ask him what he meant by that, someone else joined them. "Hey, is the new guy up yet?" a darkly tanned girl with an orange clip in her light green hair asked, standing beside B. What she wore probably would have made the ladies in Ba Sing Se look at her in distaste for showing her stomach and legs off like that, but then again, Naruto had always thought of Ba Sing Se ladies as prudes. Her orange eyes were alight with curiosity. "Ask him yourself, Fu. He's right there," Yujito told her, pointing at the blonde. She turned her gaze on him and frowned. "Why are you curled up in a ball?" she all but demanded. "Try standing, I'm sure you'll like it." That was when he realized that he was floating in midair, still in his rocking position. "Oh, sorry about that," he apologized as he lowered his feet in finding something solid to stand upon, even though he knew that there wasn't anything really solid for him to do that. She smiled at him. "That's better, right? Anyway, you've already heard my name. It's Fu and I was the Jinchuriki of the Nanabai." "And you're from Taki Geikir, right?" he asked her. She managed to look surprised by his observation. "How did you know that?" He pulled his lips back into a small, dry smile. "Your headband," he answered, pointing at the headband in question, wrapped securely around her right arm. It was quite obvious for everyone to see. When she looked down at where his finger was pointing, she had the decency to blush. "Oh, so it is. Someone get you by surprise again, Fu?" a new voice asked her. It came from a young man that stood beside Han. He was a slim person, whose kimono was hung loose over his frame, and allowed people to see some of his chest. He held a sort of pipe in his hand, and a jug of bamboo was held in place against his chest by the kimono. His brown hair covered one of his eyes, but the other one wasn't, allowing people to see its pale gold iris. Just when she was about to turn and say something in reply, someone else did. "Utakata, I thought you promised to stop saying things like that." "That?" a boy who stood next to Rashi said to him. Even though he looked like a boy, he spoke with a man's voice. There was a small smile on his face, which made the scar that trailed down from his left eye and looked stitched together move with it. His eyes were pink and had no pupils, and he had messy locks of light gray hair. He carried a pole-like weapon on his back. He also promised to be more cheerful and upbeat. Fu replied. She crossed her arms and gave a huff, like she was annoyed with what Utakata was doing. The man in question just rolled his eyes and frowned at her. I am more cheerful and upbeat, he told her. It doesn't look like that to me. She fired back at him. For the love of Kami, I would say that you're even more depressing than usual. Utakata Fu, can we please not have this fight right now? We have a newcomer, after all. He turned to look at the newcomer. Greetings, Naruto Uzumaki. I am Yagura, the Yandere Mizukage. He introduced himself. I was the Jinchuriki of the Sanbai. The fellow in the blue kimono, as you already heard, is Utakata. He hails from Kiri as well. I was the Jinchuriki of the Rokubi. Utakata added. That's good to know. Naruto said, unsure of what really to say. Once that had passed, he started counting. Hang on, there are only 8 of us. Aren't we missing someone? You are indeed. The voice of an old man answered his question. Turning his gaze to where the voice had come from, the blonde saw an old priest with a long beard standing before him. Hello, my name is Bunpoko. I was the Jinchuriki of Shikaku. I thought Gaara was the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi. He objected. The priest wasn't offended by what the blonde said. He simply smiled. I was his predecessor. He answered. Oh, I see. It was the only thing he could really say. Trying to avoid an awkward moment, he looked around, but all he saw a white void. So, where exactly are we? You don't remember? Yagura asked him with a raised eyebrow. Hey, I had the same problem. Rashi reminded the Mizukage, looking at him with a pointed expression. Same goes for me. B added. And me. Fu chimed in. You were the same when you first arrived here. Bunpoko told him. Okay. I get the point. He snapped, a severe look of annoyance appearing on his face as he looked at all of them. Taking a deep breath to calm himself down, he looked back at Naruto. Try to remember what happened to you. He encouraged the blonde. I know what happened to me. He replied with a snappish tone in his voice. I had just killed Obito and had walked a few steps away before falling to my knees. I was there for a couple of seconds when the Geto Mazo. He trailed off as he remembered what had exactly happened. The arms had grabbed hold of him and brought him closer and closer to the mouth until... That damn thing ate me. Location, Team Avatar and Team Paragon. They weren't quite sure how it happened. One moment, they were traveling through the air and on the ground when all of a sudden, the creature had, for lack of a better word, appeared. A brief moment of stunned wonder followed its appearance. Then it roared so loudly that the two teams almost felt their ears would burst. Appa and Fanning bellowed in pain at the roar and began to fall to the ground. Both Aang and Zuko were able to pull them up enough, so they wouldn't crash directly into the ground. Instead, they skidded for a few feet before finally stopping, leaving a trail behind them. Appa, you okay, buddy? Aang asked his sky bison, concern and worry evident in his voice as he leapt off and landed on the ground. The bison gave the equivalent of a groan for an answer. Guys, I don't think that Appa will be able to get up into the air again. He told the others. We just need to give them a few minutes. Zuko told him, after just finishing a similar conversation with Fanning. They should get their bearings back after that. I don't think we have a few minutes. Sokka replied as he stared at the creature that towered over them. It had a muscled build to it, but the muscles themselves were uneven. Horns ringed the top of its head, but they were all uneven in placement and in length. It had arms and legs, but the thing that grabbed their attention was the 10 tails waving in the air behind it and the single eye it had. It almost looked like a Sharingan, except for the fact it had more rings around it, and with those rings, more tomo. Does anyone have any clue what that thing is? June demanded as she reined Nyla in. Her whip was out and ready to use, but she was not about to charge headfirst into a fight against something like that. I could be wrong, but I think that's a biju. Suki answered her as she counted the tails it had. Aren't there only supposed to be 9 biju? Katara asked her. The waterbender was swiftly checking both Appa and Fanning for any actual injuries. I thought so, but I'm counting 10 tails here. She replied, waving her hand in the direction of the creature. Does it really matter how many tails it has or whether or not it's a biju? Toph asked them all. I can feel it coming straight at us. They could all feel the ground shaking as the creature made its way to them. Not knowing what else to do, they all prepare for battle. Ride the skies and roar fire, Soryu. Zuko declared, drawing the 2 Dao swords that were his Zanpakuto, making them change into their Shurkai state. The right blade began to hum with the sound of fire, and the left blade began to crackle with the sound of lightning. Defend your kingdom of snow-covered forests, Kuroga. Sokka said, drawing his own Zanpakuto as it split into 2 blades. Suki drew her sword, realizing that her fans weren't going to really work against something like the creature, and activated the shield on her left bracer. Katara, Azula, and Toph settled into their respective stances and readied their elements. The only one who didn't do anything was Aang. When he finally looked at the creature, he froze. When the creature finally stopped and looked down at them, its eye was only focused on the avatar and vice versa. Finally, what broke the silent staring contest was Aang, and what he did surprised everyone there. You! He said in a harsh snarl, his face taking on the same harshness. When he spoke, it wasn't with the voices of the past avatars. Instead, it was with one single voice, a deeper and rougher voice. The creature roared at him, and he roared in return, his eyes and tattoos glowing white as he went into the avatar state. They all just watched as he bent a large column of fire and threw directly at the creature, slamming it into its side. He then leapt into the air and bent a sphere of air around him. Once that was done, he flew directly at the creature. Is that normal for him? June asked after a few moments of stunned silence. No. Katara answered as she watched her boyfriend attack the creature with all 4 of the elements. It was almost like watching a fly attacking a badger mole, only the fly was packing some serious firepower. She would later consider it ironic she thought of the word firepower just as Aang bent a fireball and threw it at the creature's eye. Thank the spirits for that. If that was normal, she might have regretted slugging him and Ba Sing Se. What? What happened? Toph demanded. All I felt was Twinkle Toes taking off. What's going on? She kept turning to her head to look at the others. The shaking caused by the creature's feet was giving her very good clarity of what was around her. He just took off into the air. Suki told her, her eyes not looking away from the fight above them. Even if she could, she wouldn't. The last time she had technically seen Aang go into the avatar state, she had been too far away to actually see anything. Now, she had a front row seat to it. He's fighting that thing. And why are we just standing here like a bunch of idiots? The bounty hunter amongst them demanded. Come on. She urged Nyla on, cracking her whip. The Shurshas seemed to hiss in agreement and sped towards the giant creature. You ready, Akela? Sokka asked the wolf beside him. Akela's answer was to lift his head back and howl a challenge at the creature. I thought you were. Both tribesmen and wolf followed June into battle. Suki went after and soon caught up with them. The rest of them heard the sound of someone landing behind them. Given the amount that was going on, they were surprised to have heard that in the first place. Looking back, they saw a member of the Konoha ANBU standing before and instantly recognizing that he was one of the shinobi following them. Please tell your team is getting the Hokage and the rest of the shinobi in Konoha out here and into the fight. Katara said to him. He nodded his acknowledgement. We're setting up multiple entry points right now, but it might take a few minutes for a coherent force to come through and aid you. He told them. Once those words were said, he leapt back to where he had come from. I hope we can last a few minutes, she said, mostly to herself. Then we'd better start, Azula declared, walking over to Fan Ning. Have you gotten your bearings back? She asked the dragon. He got back on his feet and flapped his wings once to answer her question. Good to know. She climbed aboard him. I'll try to help Aang from the air. She told the others. Fan Ning launched himself into the air. Though you didn't want a dragon, you had Naruto, Zuko shouted up at her. Well, he's not here right now, is he? She shouted back down. The dragon then flew straight into the fight, breathing fire onto the creature. Well, let's get going already, guys, Toph told Zuko and Katara before running off to fight the creature. Both the firebender and the waterbender shared a quick look with each other before following her. Location, Naruto. I can't believe it. I was actually eaten by the ghetto Mazo, the blonde exclaimed. That's about the gist of it, Utakata told him shortly. So, we are literally inside the thing, correct? He asked the Mizukage among them. He wanted to be sure he wasn't stuck inside a very weird prison or something like that. Yes, we are, Yagura answered. And how long have you guys been in here? He couldn't help but ask the question. It was just one of those things you had to ask someone. That's a little personal, isn't it? The pink-eyed shinobi asked, a little offended by the question. Bunpoku couldn't help but chuckle. When you first met me, one of the first questions that came out of your mouth was how I kept my beard clean when I had nothing to use, he said in reply. Yagura couldn't help but sprout a small blush on his face at those words. All right, fine, you've got me there, he conceded. As he turned to look at the male blonde among them, his blush began to fade away. But to answer your question, Naruto, we're not entirely sure. What do you mean? Naruto asked back. Let me put it to you this way, Naruto. B spoke. How long has it been since I was taken? A few weeks, he answered softly. What happened that day was still painful to him, even if he didn't show it on his face anymore. It's only felt like 3 days or so for me. And as I am one of the ones who have been here the longest, I can honestly say that I have lost track, Han told him, agreeing with what B said. It was a little unnerving at first, but I got used to it. The fire paragon could only stare at the IWA shinobi with a look of semi-horror. Oh, hell no, that's not happening to me, he declared. I need to get out of here. You'll have to forgive us if we don't point out the exit to you, Yujito said, obviously sarcastic. We all kinda gave up at some point. But I still have to try. He turned around and started to run, desperate to find a way out of this place. But all he could see was the white void all around him. He must have run for a good 10 minutes before finally stopping. But when he turned around to see if the others were still in sight, he found that he was still in the same spot. Oh no, he groaned. Please, by all means, keep running, Fu said to him with a grin. Right now, you're the only person here who has the type of muscles I like, and I was enjoying the show. Excuse me, but we're right here, Yagura told her, gesturing to the rest of the males there. Rashi turned to look at him with a slightly bemused expression. Would that be the royal we you're using there, Yagura? He asked with a small smile on his lips. I know you used to be a Mizukage, but I had no idea you were royalty on top of that too. He stifled a snarl of frustration and annoyance. You know what I mean, Rashi, he replied. There are 6 other guys here. One of those guys is freakishly tall and keeps his head covered, 2 are way too old for me, not counting Mr. Freakishly Tall, and the other guy is too bulky for my tastes, Fu answered, counting them off on her fingers. That's 5, he told her. She just smiled at the Mizukage. The only kind of woman who would date you is the kind who has a fetish for small boys, she said brightly. As if on cue, all the men there, even the old priest, gave her an odd look. I'm just saying. Why don't you just become a lesbian then? He asked her. She made a face at him. I like the opposite sex much better than I do my own, thank you very much. Besides, the only other woman here would slice me to ribbons. She added with a slightly scared expression. And you know it, kid. Yujito told her with a very cat-like grin. Meanwhile, we're still stuck here with no way out. Naruto said, getting everyone's attention again. Have you guys tried to talking to your biju and figuring out a solution? He asked. All of the faces before him fell and turned into solemn expressions. Naruto, have you tried reaching out to your biju? The priest among them asked him, his voice quiet and yet was heard by everyone. He didn't say anything as he tried to call out the fox. Hey Jubi, get out here, we need to talk. He mentally shouted, only to receive no reply. This isn't the time for jokes or naps, furball. We need to talk. Again, there was no reply. Fox, I am willing to admit that everything that comes out of your mouth is nothing less than pure gold, and you always give the best advice, if you show yourself. If buttering up and flattering the biju didn't work, then he didn't know what would. But for a third time, he didn't get a reply. It was like his mind was devoid of the Jubi, and if he was being honest with himself, it made him nervous. Any luck with that? Fu asked him. Her voice had an odd hopeful tone it, like she was all praying that he would be able to contact the biju he supposedly had. He looked at all of them. He's not there. He whispered in a strangled voice. It only lasted a second before he exploded. Why isn't he there? Where's the Jubi? Where did he go? He demanded. They said nothing at first. Then Yugura spoke. Naruto, do you remember that I had said that I was the Jinchuriki of the Sanbai? Do you remember everyone else who introduced themselves saying a similar thing? He froze, going through his memories and realizing that they had said something like that. You mean, all of us? He tried to ask, only to fail at finding the right words. Everyone else nodded. The Akatsuki sealed our biju into the statue, and we were brought along for the ride. Yujito said. They're gone, we don't have them anymore. When he heard that, he couldn't believe it. The fox is, really gone? Utakata nodded once. Yep, he's gone, probably sucked out of you by the statue. It was almost complete when you showed yourself, it just needed one more thing, and you had that thing, so it reacted and ate you. Look, I know that the Akatsuki were trying to revive the Jubi. He told them all. But why would they be sealing the biju into the Geto Mazo, if that's what they were trying to do? Naruto, the Geto Mazo is more than just a statue. B answered his question. It was the husk of the Jubi's body. It was somehow summoned from the moon. If he was surprised before, now he was stunned. You're kidding me. They all shook their heads in the negative. Then he realized, with growing horror, what that meant. Are you saying? He began to ask, only to trail off. That the Jubi's body has all 9 of the biju, has regained its former strength, power, body, and movement? Utakata asked his question for him. What do you think? In the space they had unconsciously created by standing in a circle, a window was formed. And through that window, all 9 of them saw the rampage the Jubi was currently on. Location, battlefield. The few minutes both teams had to hold out for had long since passed. Konoha shinobi kept pouring out of the forests and joining the fight against the creature. But both Team Paragon and Team Avatar, at least, the conscious ones, as Aang was still in the Avatar state, and was attacking the creature, knew that those reinforcements would probably stop coming in soon. If they wanted to keep a good chance of surviving, or even winning, this fight, it couldn't be drawn out. While the creature's main attention was on Aang, its tail seemed to act of their own accord against the others. They swept down across the ground, striking anyone who hadn't been fast enough to get out of their way. But the effect this could have had on the shinobi was greatly minimized by the benders on the ground, utilizing their respective elements to the fullest. Remind me again why I didn't bring the Yuyan archers, or the dragon's fangs with us when we came back. Zuko shouted over to Toph as he beat back a tail with a large column of fire creating by spinning the right blade of his Zanpakuto. The tail tried to fight against the fire for a couple of minutes before giving up the fight and moving away. Because you said, and I quote, "It's supposed to be a vacation away from all the stress and problems we've been having recently, and quite frankly, we need it," she answered as she bent the earth to jut out 2 columns to trap the tail that Zuko had beaten back, only to have it slithered free. "Well, the next time I say something like that, hit me so that we can make sure it's not stupidity talking. And make sure I bring one of them, or both," he ordered. "I thought that was supposed to be Azula's or Naruto's job?" she asked him. It certainly seemed like in the past. If one of them had said something potentially stupid, the other two would try and make sure it wasn't, which had led to an interesting evening on Ember Island that involved identical twin girls, a misunderstanding, and the amount of waves that had washed up on the beach that day. "Were they there at the time?" he asked back, half sarcastic. He bent a fireball at the creature's body, and was supported by a few shinobi who knew Katon Jutsus. But it didn't seem to work, as the fireballs just seemed to bounce off of its skin. All right, I will. Would you like me to have the Dai Li and Kyoshi warriors come along as well? You'd have to take that up with Suki. Other than that, yes please," he answered before suddenly throwing the left blade of his Zanpakuto at an incoming tail. It turned into a lightning bolt as it flew through the air, but missed as the tail suddenly curved around it and making it miss. He gave an annoyed grunt as he grabbed hold of the sword again. "Hey, what happened to Katara?" The blind earthbender had lost track of her in the midst of the singular chaos that was the creature. Now that she was actually looking for her, Toph couldn't feel the waterbender. "She's up in the sky with Azula and Aang." Appa was able to get back up on his feet, so she took advantage of it. He told her. Looking up, he saw the sky bison flying evasively through the sky, avoiding the creature's attacks. He would periodically fly low to a nearby river so his passenger would be able to bend some water out of it before flying back up. If the creature knew about what Appa was doing, it paid no attention. Instead, it kept its attention focused on Aang. Feeling a hand clap his shoulder, he looked over to see who it was. He relaxed somewhat when he saw that it was Shikamaru. "Well, this is troublesome," the Nara clan heir said as he stared up at the creature. "Now is not a good time for that, Mr. Lazy." Toph shouted at him as she bent a boulder out of the ground and threw at an incoming tail. The boulder shattered against it, but it was enough to make the tail recoil. "I can see that," he told her. "Well, can you get in there and stop it with whatever it is you do? You know, that shadow-grabbing thingy?" she asked, not looking back at him. "My clan is already doing that. So far, their efforts are not even slowing it down." He had a look of worry on his face as he spoke. "Do you have any idea what it is?" Zuko asked him. He shook his head in the negative. "I don't have a single clue." The sound of a running dog somehow managed to fill their ears, and when they looked in the direction where it came, they saw Akamaru coming towards them. "Kiba, do you know what that thing is?" Shikamaru asked the hound's rider. He also shook his head in the negative. "All I know is that it smells bad," he answered. "And I'm not the only one. Shino's bugs are afraid to even come out, and when Hinata tried to look at it with the Byakugan, she screamed and covered her eyes. I'm not sure if she's gone blind or not. Do not worry, my youthful friends," Lee shouted as he landed next to them. "Niji suffered the same pain earlier in this fight, but he has recovered. I am sure the youthful Hinata will do the same. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Lee." Out of the chaos, June came towards them, riding Nyla hard. "What in the name of the spirits is that thing?" she demanded as she stopped her Shirshu aside Akamaru. Behind her, several members of the Akimichi clan grew in height and tried to push the creature back. Even though its attention wasn't on them, they only succeeded in pushing it half an inch back. Its tail swapped in and knocked them all aside, sending them flying through the air. Most of them were able to shrink back down to normal size before hitting the ground. The ones who didn't made a bit of a mess where they landed. Both Shikamaru and Kiba winced at that. "That's going to hurt," Kiba stated. "You guys still haven't answered my question." June told them. "What in the name of the spirits is that thing?" she asked again, pointing her whip at for extra emphasis. "We do not know, my very youthful friend," Lee told her. "But we do not need to know its name to defeat it. We only need our youth." He pumped the air with his fist. If they tried to look closely, they would have sworn that there were fires burning bright in his eyes. "Lee, right now, I don't think any of us care about what you say. We care about what you do." She turned Nyla back to where the fight was. "Now come on. We need to beat that thing." She and the Shirsha charged off again, going straight for the creature. Both Toph and Lee were right behind her. Zuko, on the other hand, saw that Appa was flying towards the water. "We need to get Katara on the wounded," he said, mostly to himself, before running off in the direction of the river. Before either of the two Konoha shinobi could say anything, one of the tails slammed into the earth near them, causing giant boulders to start raining down on them. Kiba and Akamaru leapt into action. "Getsuga!" The heir to the Inuzuka clan cried as he and Akamaru twisted into mini gray tornadoes, smashing the boulders into smaller pieces. Other Inuzuka clan members and their partners were doing the same thing all around them. During all of this, Shikamaru tried to get out of the way of the shower. He kept his head down and kept moving. Once he was out of the way of the boulders, he saw that Choji, Ino, Tenten, and Sokka with Akela standing around him. "Nice hustle there, Shikamaru," Ino told him with a smirk. "I think that's the fastest I've ever seen you run." "You are a very troublesome woman, Ino," he said in reply. "Do you have any idea how to fight that thing?" Tenten asked him. She was panting slightly, letting the others know she had just been on the front line, trying to beat the creature back. "No, I don't. Even an inkling of a plan that I have is squashed by it and what it does," he answered with a shake of his head. "The fact that Aang seems to be dueling it doesn't really help." They all looked up at the sky. Even with Azula and Fanning helping him, Katara and Appa had disappeared from the sky, which meant Zuko had made contact with her. Aang's attention was fully on the creature and vice versa. It did almost look like a duel, if the look of hard harshness on the Avatar's face whenever they could see it was anything to go by. "Do we know what happened?" Choji asked Sokka. "No." One moment, he was checking over Appa. The next, he and that creature made eye contact, and he snarled at it. The tribesman answered. It was almost disturbing to see, actually. The only time he had actually seen Aang lose his temper was when they encountered the Sandbenders after Appa was taken. But that had been a full-on explosion of anger. What he had seen was pure rage, contempt, and hate when those two saw each other. That was something he never wanted to see on Aang's face again. A loud explosion filled the air, making them all look up. It seemed like Aang had torn a chunk of the earth and set it ablaze with his bending before sending it hurling straight towards the creature. It caught the flaming chunk of rock, but then it exploded in its hand, making it roar in pain. When they all heard that roar, everyone clasped their ears in pain. Even Fanning started to falter. The only person who didn't hold his ears and prayed that the roar would stop was Aang. Instead, he bent the nearby river up out of its bed and slammed into the creature's mouth, essentially giving it a mouthwash. It stumbled backwards a few feet before finally stopping. Seeing this, Aang tried to up the pressure of the water, but the creature reached out and struck his sphere of air, making him lose control of the water. The creature tried to catch him and crush him, reaching out with its claw. But before it could, an angry lowing filled the air. Appa swooped down from above the two and knocked the claw with a flap of his tail, bending the air into a furious column of twisting air. The creature then turned its eye upon the sky bison and tried to attack it, but Aang intervened with a roar of his own and several fireballs, beating the creature back away from Appa, who quickly flew away. Fan Ing and Azula rejoined the fight, the dragon with his fire and the firebender with her lightning. And all the while, the creature's tails tried to either assist it in its fight against Aang, or tried to kill the shinobi attacking it. If we manage to live through this, I hope to Kami that we never find something this troublesome again. Shikamaru muttered to himself as they all rejoined the fight. He was unaware of the fact that everyone there had unconsciously prayed for the same thing. Location: Naruto. He wanted to look away from the window, but his eyes remained glued to what was appearing. They all were. They just watched in silence as they saw the Jubi attack Aang and the Konoha shinobi. Finally, he tore his gaze away from the mirror and looked at the rest of them. "We have to do something," he declared. They all looked up at him after that declaration. "So you have something in mind?" Utakata asked him in a very dry tone of voice. "No, not really," he answered honestly. It was a little embarrassing, especially after what he had just said, but it was the truth. "We still have to do something." "And what would that be, kid?" Rashi asked, half curious and half amused at what he heard. "I don't know. But we just can't stand here and do nothing," the blonde protested. It was just wrong in every sense he had entrusted agreed with what he said. "Why not?" asked Han. "We're quite familiar with doing nothing." "Yeah, it's become quite a good friend of ours ever since we got stuck in this place." Fu agreed with a shrug of her shoulders. He could only stare at them. "Are you telling me that you would rather do nothing and let that continue?" He pointed down at the window, just as Azula threw lightning at the Jubi. "You wouldn't try to stop it?" "What can we do?" Bunpoku asked him in a quiet, gentle voice. "We are stuck inside of the Jubi itself. And in case you haven't noticed already, we don't have a way out of here." Yujito added, her tone was pure sarcasm. "Besides, what's the point of trying to save them?" Fu asked as she stared at the mirror with a frown on her face. Naruto swung his head over to look at her. "You want to say that again?" he asked her, his tone challenging. She looked up at him, the frown still on her face. "Why should we try to save them when they've done nothing for us?" she asked him, meeting his silent challenge. He gestured angrily down at the window, right at the image of the dragon. "The woman who's riding the dragon is the woman I love," he said in a tight voice. "She, as well as many of my friends and comrades, is out there fighting it." She looked down at the mirror and then back at him. "That's not good enough." "What?" he asked. As he spoke, his voice became a growl. "What do you mean that's not good enough?" "Of course, it's good enough." "Not to me, it isn't. I see no reason to try and stop the Jubi from its rampage. My friends are out there," he shouted, jabbing his finger down at the mirror. "That's their fault," she replied with ease. "It's quite stupid of them, really. They should have just run, they'd have lived if they did. Now, they're just going to die." When he heard that, Naruto let a roar of anger and leapt for her, spinning into a kick. She wasn't expecting that move and got his foot buried in her stomach. She flew backwards from the circle, and he followed through with her. When the two of them landed on the ground, they immediately started to fight each other. There was no real sense of actual fighting styles as they exchanged blows. They just turned into brawlers. Sometimes, they would separate from one another for a couple of seconds before going at it again. The only thing that remained constant was the angry looks both of them had on their faces. But when they separated themselves again and charged forward to punch each other, a block of sand appeared in front of their fists, stopping both of their punches. Surprised by the interrupting action, they didn't see the two small tendrils of sand sneaking up behind them and grabbing them by the foot. Finding themselves hoisted up into the air, they found themselves looking at Bunpoku from the upside-down perspective. Are the two of you finished? He asked them in a mildly disapproving voice. Their answer was to glare at one another. He frowned and the sand started to shake them, making them wiggle in the air. Must I repeat myself? He asked them as the sand stopped. Naruto shook his head rapidly, not wanting to get shaken like that again. No, we'll stop. The priest smiled. Thank you. The sand let go of their feet and they fell to the ground, barely managing to land on their feet like a pair of cats. Still feeling the pains from where Fu had managed to strike him, the blonde looked over at Bunpoku. How did you do that? He asked. The old man chuckled at that. I was the Jinchuriki of Shikaku at one point, remember? But there's no sand in here, and you don't have a gourd or anything that can even remotely hold sand. He pointed out. Once those words had been spoken, the sand disappeared. The reality around you can be bended to your will. Yagura explained. Really? Asked Naruto, making the Mizukage nod his head. The fire paragon looked down at his hand and started to imagine a kunai was there. He shaped the weapon in his mind, remembering the color of it, the sharpness of it, how the light dully reflected off of it, the weight of it, and the feel of it in his hand. And all of a sudden, there it was in his hand. Cool. He stated. I know, right? V asked with a grin. He returned the grin before looking around. Wait, if the reality can be bent to our will, why haven't one of you tried creating a room or something? He asked the rest of them. We have. Han answered him. But it all returns to this: when someone new arrives, like you. It, for lack of a better phrase, goes back to basic. I see. His curious expression turned serious. We're getting off topic here. We need to stop the Jubi. And why should we? Fu demanded of him, the frown on her face turning into a scowl. They all called us freaks and monsters. They told their kids to keep away from us. They beat and molested us when we were young, and when we would finally become powerful, they would glare at us, make scathing comments about us behind our backs, and keep us confined to a house on the outskirts of the village unless they needed us. They all stared at her in silence. Finally, Yagura looked at Rashi. He knew that it was probably not the best time, but he felt that it had to be said. And you thought I was royalty? The IWA shinobi scowled at him. Not the time, Yagura. He said in reply. Fu, I know how you must feel about your village. Bunpoku told her with a gentle voice. I was imprisoned and despised by the people of Sunagakure. But I held no hatred for them or any ill will. You have to find it in your heart to do the same. What if I don't want to? She asked him. Then why did you still wear the headband of Taki Gakure? Yujito asked her. Don't you have anyone you would protect in the village? Someone who would have made you stay? The priest continued, ignoring the former Jinchuriki of the Nibi. She fell silent, thinking about it. My twin, Shibuki. She finally answered. He tried his best to protect me when we were little. When he became the leader of the village, I promised that I would always be there to help him, even though his council disapproved of that. And how do you think he's feeling since you were taken? Naruto asked her, latching onto the idea. Would you be willing to let the Jubi come to your village and destroy it, killing him in the process? Hell no. She declared loudly with a look of wrathful anger on her face at the mere thought of it. That's what I feel right when I look at that. He pointed down at the mirror, which showed Aang and Azula attacking the Jubi, while the tails were attacking the surrounding shinobi, trying to smash or crush them. I want to stop the Jubi to protect them. I don't know about all of you, but I do know that there are people who miss you. He looked over at the two Kumo shinobi. Yujito, when I was in Kumo and heard your name, it was spoken with respect and awe. A lot of people said that it was a tragedy that you were taken. B, when your brother found out what happened, he tried to kill me. When he calmed down, he ordered us to leave and never come back. He turned his gaze to the shinobi from IWA. Han, Rashi, Anoki still grieves for you. He sent shinobi out to find you too when he heard that you were being attacked. He did? Han asked. He couldn't believe it. He never would have thought his sensei would risk resources like that, just to make sure they were okay. Naruto nodded before turning to look at the priest among them. Bunpoku, you say that you hold no hatred for Suna. Would you willingly let the Jubi have the chance to destroy it? I would not. He stated firmly. Yagura, history might remember you as a bloody tyrant, but would you allow the Jubi to tear Kiri apart? The fire paragon asked the former Jinchuriki of the Sanbai. Yagura scowled at his question. I swore an oath to protect, defend, and lead that village with all of my being. I will not let it be destroyed. He looked at Utakata, who spoke before he did. And of me? Asked the former Jinchuriki of the Rokubi. I left Kiri before I was captured. I hold no real loyalty to it. But would you let it be destroyed? The blonde pressed him. You would truly let the village as well as the rest of the world burn and be torn asunder, just because you didn't feel like trying to stop it all? He was silent as the words went through his mind and stayed there for a little while. I'm not that selfish, he declared after a few moments of silence. But why would it matter in the end? Rashi asked Naruto, getting everyone's attention. Do you think that this is the first time someone's tried to collect the biju to gain ultimate power? I'll grant you that this might be the first chance that they've succeeded. But even if we do stop the Jubi, and if we get out, there'll be someone else down the road who will want to do something similar to us. They all had to admit, it was a good point. So long as they were around and so long as they held the biju, odds are that there was someone who would want to obtain them to wield ultimate power. Maybe it would be 5 years from now, maybe 15, maybe 50, or maybe when they were all dead and new Jinchuriki had been created. The fact remained the same, there would be someone else who would want the power of the biju. As a silence fell over them, Naruto looked down at the window. Then remembering what had been said before, he looked around the white void and then at his hand. Bunpoku, you said that the reality around us can be bent to our will, right? And we are currently inside the Jubi? Yes, on both accounts. The priest answered. Okay then. He said with a smile that had any of his enemies had seen, they would have known to run. I have an idea. Location, battlefield. In the designated area for healing the wounded, Katara, Sakura, and other medical shinobi were doing their best to stay on top of things. The number of people coming into the area was becoming more and more steady, something that made them all nervous. But they didn't stop, they just kept going. More incoming! Shouted a nearby shinobi, alerting them. They all turned to see who it was. It turned to be Shikamaru supporting Kiba, with Hinata and Sokka following them. Both Akela and Akamaru were at the end of the line. Katara immediately ran over to her brother's side. Sokka, what happened? She asked him, looking him over. One of the tails managed to send a rock the size of one Akela's paws at me and clipped my side. He answered in a slightly strained voice. He winced and let out strangled hiss when she found the area. Ah. Yeah, that's the spot. Come on. She led him to one of the available spaces and sat him down. She reached for the pouch at her side and bent the water out of it. What about you guys? Sakura asked the others. I'm almost out of chakra. Hinata answered, swaying on her feet. Sakura signaled one of the other medics, who gently led the Hyuga clan heiress away so she could receive the right treatment. Kiba's leg is broken and I have a concussion. Shikamaru told her. I can speak for myself, Shikamaru. Kiba told him with a pained voice. He was taken by Sakura to a space next to Sokka and sat him down. Shikamaru all but collapsed next to her. No one told him to move, as he wasn't really blocking the path, and everyone was too busy to complain. Sakura went to work right away. Covering her hands in green chakra, she placed them gently against the Inuzuka's broken leg and began to heal it. She took her time, as she and Kiba knew that the injury put him out of action for the rest of the fight. But she also didn't waste time. She was careful and made sure that his leg would be successfully mended. She kept her focus on the leg, ignoring the sounds of nearby shinobi groaning in pain, or even the few who were dying, and the sounds of battle coming from nearby. "There you go," she declared as she finished. "It's mended, but you'll have to stay out of the fight from now on, Kiba." "Yeah, I kind of figured," he replied as he gently tested his newly mended leg. Akamaru whined in relief at the sight. "Now, Shikamaru, hold still," she ordered the Nara clan heir, turning her attention to him. He didn't grumble or complain as she brought her hands up and around his head. "Just what in the name of Kami are we fighting?" she asked them. "You know, I've been hearing that question a lot recently." Sokka mused aloud. "Personally, I'm going with big, ugly, scary thingy and leaving it at that." He winced as his sister continued to work on his side. "Sokka, it has to be something," she said in small protest. "What would you call it then?" he challenged her. "I don't know. Maybe it's some sort of spirit." He rolled his eyes somewhat. "Ah, yes, of course. How silly of me not to realize that anything that looks weird or unnatural must be some sort of spirit," he said with full-blown sarcasm. It soon disappeared as his face scrunched up in pain. "Ow. You did that on purpose," he accused her. They both knew that Katara was a master healer. She wouldn't have made him feel any more pain than need be. So when he felt the pain come back, he knew that she did it. She just looked at him with an expression that was half amused and half innocent. "Did I?" Akela, who was lying on his stomach next to Sokka, rolled his eyes in exasperation. "Now's not the time to be fooling around, Katara," Sakura admonished her. "Right, sorry." She refocused on the healing. "But in all seriousness, what is that thing?" the Hokage's student asked after a moment. "I already said I don't know," Shikamaru answered. He was still trying to figure it out, but he just didn't know enough. "Like I said, I've been hearing that a lot recently," Sokka asked him before gasping shortly in pain. "Ah. Ow. Katara. Will you keep your voice down?" she told him crossly. "And that was your rib mending, not me." "Oh. Sorry." Overhead and off in the distance, they heard the Jubi roar. While they weren't close enough to get the full effect, the sound of the roar echoed and reached them, making them wince and try to desperately ignore it. As the roar faded away, more wounded shinobi came in. Among them were Lee and Niji. "We have got to find a way to defeat that thing," Kiba said as they watched the newcomers lead to free spacing to be checked over and receive treatment. "And how exactly do you suppose we do that?" Shikamaru asked him. "The troublesome thing isn't even paying attention to us." "I know that. It keeps its attention on Aang. But we still need to beat it somehow. Kiba, everyone is having a hard time staying close to it, let alone trying to defeat it," Sokka told the Inuzuka clan heir. "Those tails are keeping us at bay, and Aang isn't helping either." In his sole concentration of the creature, Aang didn't seem to realize that he would have been killing other people. Thankfully, Zuko and Sokka had realized this and began running interference, Zuko in the sky riding Appa and Sokka on the ground, which was why he got clipped by a rock. "Aang is still in the avatar state?" Katara asked her brother. He nodded. "This is the longest I've ever seen him stay like that. Those two are completely focused on trying to kill one another. Nothing can stop them from attacking one another. But why would that be? We've never seen that creature before. Katara, you and I both heard that voice come from Aang. I think it would be a safe bet to say that one of his past lives knew what that creature is. And going by how hard Aang is fighting, I'd say that they don't like each other. I guess that's something we'll have to find out once this battle is over." Kiba said. Everyone, look at the monster! Shouted someone, making everyone turns their head at the creature as directed. When they did, they all saw something incredibly weird. The creature was standing completely still, its mouth agape. Oddly enough, Aang didn't press his advantage. He just hung in the sky in his sphere of air. Both Appa and Fanning did nothing as well, staying afloat in the air next to the sphere. For a single moment, the entire world felt frozen. Then that moment was gone. The creature gave Aang one last look, full of hatred and rage. It gave one last cry, that oddly sounded like it was grieving and also pleading. And then, it just disappeared. One moment it was there and the next, it wasn't. It just vanished. Everyone just stared at the space where the creature had stood. No one said a word. There were no shouts or cries of victory. There was just silence. Later, whether they had known about the others or not, everyone had agreed that the end to the fight could only be described with one word: anticlimactic. In the 2 weeks since the fight against the creature, things went relatively back to normal for Konoha. People went about their business and left it at that. Those who had been badly injured during the fight were immediately rushed back to the hospital. While many lives were saved, some were still lost. The shinobi who could be put into action were going out on missions like nothing had ever happened. But for Team Paragon and Team Avatar, those 2 weeks were spent looking for their missing teammate. Whenever they could, they would head out and hunt for him. But no matter how many times they looked, they just couldn't find Naruto. Even Nyla couldn't find him, as June told them that the blonde's scent kept disappearing and reappearing. But they didn't give up on him. They kept on searching for him, and the person who was at the forefront of each search was Azula. "We all set?" Sokka asked as he looked around at everyone there. They stood in front of the gates to Konoha, and were about to go looking for the blonde again. "Yeah, we are," Zuko answered from atop of Fanning. He was the only one on there because he had forbidden Azula from riding with him after she had kicked him off of the dragon and into the sky, even though she had apologized and said that she was a little on edge, which a more ungrateful person might replied with understatement. "Same here," Aang said from atop of Appa with Momo on his shoulders. Once the fight with the creature was over, he had descended from the sky to the ground, going out of the avatar state. When everyone asked him what had happened, he surprised them by claiming he hadn't a clue of what happened. The last thing he remembered was making eye contact with the creature. After that, nothing. Both Ino and her father offered to go into his mind to find what the relationship between him and the creature was, but everyone vetoed the idea, saying that there was a very good chance of them getting stuck in there. "Then let's get going already," Toph said with impatience, itching to start looking again. Since they continually failed in finding Naruto, some people were beginning to believe that he was dead. Both of the teams kept denying that, insisting that he was alive. It had gone so far that Team Paragon started a brawl in a bar when someone who disliked Naruto said that he was happy the fox brat was died loudly. Nyla perked up and started sniffing the air, catching his rider by surprise. "Whoa, what is it, Nyla?" June asked him as she resettled herself in the saddle. "Do you have his scent?" Everyone looked over at the Shirshu with naked hope in their eyes. Maybe this would be their break. Maybe the scent would hold, and they would be able to find Naruto. But when the Shirshu lowered his head and began to hiss, June was confused. "What's up with you? The only time you hiss like that is when Naruto's around and just insulted." She trailed off as she looked in the direction Nyla was hissing at, her jaw dropping. When everyone looked in the same direction, their jaws also dropped, even the animals. What they all felt at the scene in front of them was summed perfectly by Sokka. "You have got to be kidding me." But nobody was kidding, what they saw was the truth. Walking towards them, like nothing had really happened in the past 2 weeks, was Naruto himself. They just stared in shocked silence as he came up to them, stopping a few paces in front of Katara. "Hey guys?" he offered somewhat weakly. No one said a word to him, they just stared at him. The air around was becoming saturated with a feeling of awkwardness. It finally broke when Azula walked up to him and slugged him hard across the face, sending him to the ground with an audible thump. "I deserve that," he admitted from where he lay on the ground. 3 weeks. She bellowed from the top of her voice, standing over him like a vengeful goddess. "You left us and disappeared for 3 weeks. You left me and disappeared for 3 weeks. If you ever do something like that again to me, you are a dead man. I will hunt you down and make you wish that you had never been born, let alone left. Understand?" Once the tirade was over, he couldn't help but laugh as he stood up. "Cammy, I love you, woman," he declared with a big goofy grin. The two of them moved as one, reaching for each other and locking lips in a kiss that was hot enough to set them on fire. The reaction among the teams varied. Aang, Katara, and surpassingly, Momo, blushed at the sight. Sokka and Suki shared a smile. Zuko, Akela, and June rolled their eyes and waited for them to stop. When they finally separated from one another, June spoke. "Are you guys done?" "Maybe," Naruto answered. The grin was still somewhat there. "We might find some privacy next time. Or we might not." "Where'd you get the sword?" Sokka asked him, looking at the katana strapped to his side. "The same place you and Zuko got yours," he replied. It would have been a cryptic answer if anyone else had heard it, but everyone there knew what he meant and left it at that. "Where did you go for 3 weeks, Naruto?" Aang finally asked. "I went to take care of the last known Akatsuki member, and to make sure some people I knew got home safely," the blonde answered. This time, it was a cryptic answer that nobody understood, except for himself. Location, Kumo. Was in his own personal training ground, pounding target dummies into the ground. He had been doing this for the past few weeks, ever since he had learned that B had been taken. As that thought crossed his mind, tears started to well up in his eyes. That night, he had destroyed an entire forest in sadness and rage. He wanted to take it out on the Konoha shinobi, specifically, the Jinchuriki of the Kyubi, but he knew it would bring either B or Yujito back. He could still remember the days when he had met both of them. Yujito had been brought home by his father, and he had instantly adopted her as a sister. When he met B, he had been trying to find his tag team partner, and found it in the odd kid who liked to rap, even if it was bad. He called the two of them brothers, and he stayed by those words. His nostalgia and sadness turned into anger, and he focused that into beating the dummies apart. When he was on the last one, he crushed it completely with a lariat fueled with anger and grief. It flew through the air, and went through 4 trees before stopping. As he stood there, panting from exhaustion, he heard a low whistle. "Damn, bro. That was quite the show," a familiar voice said, making him freeze in place. He then turned around to see who it was, and saw that it was both Yujito and B standing before him. "Miss us much?" his adopted sister asked him with a smirk. Location, IWA. Anoki made his way to the entrance of his village. He had been pulled out of a meeting because of a message that required him to come down to the entrance, saying it was urgent. "All right, I'm here," he said snappishly to the entrance guard. "What's the problem?" The guard simply pointed at the other side of the entrance. He followed the finger and went still when he saw what it was the shinobi was pointing at. "Hey, you old grump," Rashi said with a grin and a wave. "Anoki-sensei," Han said in greeting, being a little more formal. Location, Kiri. Mei sat at her desk, going through paperwork. The stuff seemed to be never-ending. "Please give me a distraction right now," she silently begged. That was when the door to her office was knocked on. "Yes?" she called out, secretly glad for it. "Lady Mizukage, there's a guy out here who wants to see you." Reimu spoke from beyond the door. "He says he used to be a shinobi." "Send him in." The door opened and a handsome young man in a blue kimono walked. She didn't know why, but he looked oddly familiar. "Are you the Mizukage?" He asked her. I am her. She answered. My name is Utakata. I'm the Jinchuriki of the Rokubi and former shinobi of this village. I was hoping you'd let me come back. Location, Taki. Shibuki was waiting in a clearing just outside of the village. A messenger hawk had flown in earlier, telling him to come to this clearing at this time, alone. Normally, he would have never paid attention to something like that, but it had been written in a coded message that only 2 people knew, and he was one of them. Thinking about that letter made him think about his twin sister, making his heart beat with sadness. When they were little, despite what had happened to her and despite what he could do to protect her, she had been one that protected him. After what happened with his former sensei invading, he made a vow to never be weak or afraid anymore. But that vow didn't do any good when he learned that Fu had been taken. So, he promised to never let that happen again. As he kept his back to a tree and kept checking and rechecking the surrounding area, he heard a chuckle he hadn't heard in a long time. Nice to see you finally grown up and manned up, Shibuki. Where's the guy who used to be terrified of a leaf floating by? He looked at where the voice originated from. Is that you, Fu? He asked with naked hope in his voice. As if to answer his question, she stepped out of the shadows of the trees and into the light of the clearing. Hey, little brother, been a while, she casually greeted him. When he heard those words, he frowned and lapsed into an old argument. For the last time, Fu, you're my twin sister, not my older sister. Hey, I came out of Mom 5 minutes before you did. That makes me the elder. They stood in the clearing, arguing a pointless argument. And yet, they did it with smiles on their faces. They were happy to see one another. Location, Konoha. Both Sakura and Sasuke walked out of the hospital. Sasuke had still been in there during the fight with the creature, and he was finally getting out. I am glad to get out of that bed. He told her as they walked. I think I was about to go stir crazy in there. Well, you didn't miss much, I can assure you. She said in reply. He frowned slightly at her. That's a lie and the both of us know. She laughed lightly and he found that he couldn't keep his frown on his face. Instead, it was replaced with a smile. But when he looked to see beyond the walls of the hospital, the smile died away and was replaced with a small look of horror. Seeing the look, Sakura turned to see what had caused that. Oh no, not them, she said with an annoyed expression when she saw what it was. Just beyond the walls of the hospital were Sasuke's fangirls. Sasuke. They all cheered when they saw him. He didn't do anything in response, at least none that they saw. He had figured out that when it came to fangirls, it boiled down to 3 basic things. The first was don't make any sudden movements, the second was avoid making eye contact, and the third was if the first 2 failed, run like hell and find a good hiding spot, which were becoming rapidly diminished for him. However, Sakura did something that surprised him and the fangirls. She turned and pulled Sasuke into a kiss which, after being momentarily surprised, responded gladly to. The fangirls just watched in stunned silence as the makeout session continued. When it finally stopped, Sakura gave them a challenging stare. Mine, she declared. A groan swept through the horde, as well as a few sobs. Not wanting to risk angering her as her reputation about that was well known, they all left. When they were finally gone, Sasuke looked at her. You are an amazing woman, he stated. She smiled at that. Flatterer, she replied. Now come on, the others have probably already started the party. Night had fallen as Tsunade walked down the streets of the village. After Naruto gave his, rather brief, report of what he had been doing the past 3 weeks, word somehow spread that the Akatsuki had been destroyed. People felt that was cause for celebration and an impromptu festival was thrown together. Everyone was having a good time. But she wasn't, not yet. Multiple things were going through her mind. Just because the known members of the Akatsuki were died, didn't mean the organization itself was done for. They still had no idea how many people were a part of it, or even who those people were. They had no idea where they were hiding, or what they would do now that the Akatsuki was shambles. At least, she hoped it would be in shambles. How they received funding outside of missions or resources was still a complete mystery. And there was also the matter of Kabuto. They hadn't heard even a whisper of him since he broke out. This was worrying because the man was surely up to something, they just didn't know what it was or where he even was. Not to mention that they had no idea what that creature was. The suggestion of it being a biju had been bounced around, but people really didn't believe it. It was common knowledge that there were only 9 biju. She mentally ordered herself to put all that in the back of her head. There'll be plenty of time to worry about it later, she told herself. For now, you have a night to relax. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs that led up to the house where Naruto and Azula lived. She had decided to invite both Team Paragon and Team Avatar to join her and the Konoha 11 for a small party before they left, and the last thing she heard about them was they were all at Naruto's and Azula's place. She walked up the steps and went for the door. But when she reached for the handle and touched it, the door swung slightly inward. Cautious and concerned, she pushed the door open, seeing the house was shrouded in darkness. "Hello?" she called out, reaching for the light switch and flicking it on. When the lights came on and showed her what lay inside, her heart fell. She had been in the house once or twice, usually with Jiraiya, when they had to talk to Naruto and Azula, and she had seen what they had done, consciously or unconsciously, to add their own style to the place. But now it was empty, completely bare. It was waiting for someone to come and live there. As she walked into the house, she saw a small piece of paper lying on the kitchen counter. She walked over to it and picked it up, noticing that it had Naruto's handwriting on it. It simply read, "Job's done." Chapter 73, Fear and Future. Location, Naruto. He sat in a small room, trying to be careful not to wrinkle what he wore. If he did, somehow his ass would be lit in fire. "Nervous much, Gaki?" asked his own personal pain in the ass, aka the Jubi. "Of course, I'm nervous," he replied mentally, as he could not risk talking aloud. Despite the others about his tenant, they hadn't told anyone else. "Yeah, well, I've never understood these kinds of things," the fox admitted with blasé. "It seems kind of redundant, not to mention pointless." "Well, you're not human. You're an only Kami knows how old demon fox with too many tails, and a sarcastic attitude that I really don't need right now." The blonde snapped at him. "So glad you noticed." The biju told him, using that sarcastic attitude he was just told he had. "Now you would just relax already?" "I cannot relax. I'm freaking out here. How the hell did Zuko manage to stay calm when this happened to him?" he demanded as he stood from the chair he had been sitting in and began to pace around the room. The Jubi rolled his eyes. "I'm sure he had the same panic attack you're having right now, he was just able to fake his calmness very well," he answered casually, like he didn't care what was going on, which was probably true. "Now will you relax? Or am I going to hit you with a bombardment of images that will make you relax?" "You don't need to do that," he hastily assured the fox. He knew those images the biju was talking about, having been subject to them when he had been in boot and got frustrated by either the training officers or when the fox was teaching him. Quite frankly, he did not need them right now. It might just make things worse. He finally stopped pacing and stood in front of the mirror that hung on the wall. It had been more than 2 years since Team Paragon had gone to the elemental countries to destroy the Akatsuki. In those 2 years, he had changed in subtle ways. He had grown a few inches in height. His visage had hardened, making him look more man than boy or teenager now. His hair had grown longer and shaggier, falling back and down to the back of his neck. He would have cut it and make it shorter, but Azula had said she liked it like that, so he didn't do anything. He had been recently toying with the idea of growing a beard. Not a full-on beard, but something like a goatee. The clothes he wore were formal robes in the colors of black and deep scarlet. His medallion hung outside the robes for all to see. The door to the room opened, the sound of it making him turn his head to see who it was. "Oh, it's just you guys," he said with some small relief as Sokka and Zuko walked in. "And what exactly does that mean?" Sokka asked him with a raised eyebrow. The tribesman had also changed in those 2 years. He was also taller, and what muscles he decided to show had taken on a bit of a muscular tone. He had kept his hair in the style of his tribe, but had shaved the sides of his head. His medallion was out for everyone to see as well, over robes of light and dark blue. "Are you nervous?" "Of course not, I'm terrified," he replied, swinging his body around to face them. "For the love of the spirits, you knew this was going to happen," the water paragon told him with a roll of his eyes. "You made the decision." "I can still freak out, Sokka. I'm getting married." He gestured wildly to emphasize his point. "I still don't see why that's cause for you to start panicking." "You will, Sokka, you will," Zuko promised him with a small smile. The Fire Lord had grown as well, putting some muscle, and a little bit of weight, on his body. Even though he wore the headpiece in his hair, said hair still fell around his face, framing his eyes. He wore the robes of the Fire Lord, looking comfortable and confident in them. "And if it helps, Naruto, I can assure you that Azula is just as nervous as you are," he told the blonde reassuringly. He snorted. "The difference there, Zuko, is that she's able to calm herself down by setting things on fire. I don't have that option," he pointed out. "Going by that definition, you are going to have a very interesting 9 months when you finally get my sister pregnant," the scarred dragon Drilly remarked. When he heard that, Naruto's face blanched. However, Sokka came to his rescue. "This is coming from the guy who married Mississippi Hidden Knives and Projectiles? If anyone is going to have an interesting 9 months when their wife is pregnant, it's going to be you when Mai is carrying that child." They all had the same image of a pregnant Mai fiddling with a throwing knife, an annoyed expression on her face that was on the verge of becoming pissed off. That image chilled them to the bone. Zuko went a step further and shuddered. "Thanks for that, Sokka," he said. "I really appreciate it." "Not a problem, Zuko," the tribesman replied with a grin. Thanks to all that, Naruto was able to relax a little. "Has June showed up?" he asked them. When they had returned from the elemental countries, June had immediately left, telling them that she'll see them around before riding off on Nyla. While that was true, some of them did want to see her a bit more often. Sokka shook his head. "Not since the last time I checked. But who knows? Maybe she'll show up just as the feast starts." She was never one to miss out on free food. Whenever the bounty hunter had eaten with them, never once had she paid. She was usually the first one out the door. "Well, let's hope that she doesn't cause a scene if she does show up," the blonde replied. "I'd be more worried that Nyla will actually try to kill you. You know, with everyone being distracted, it would be the perfect opportunity." Zuko rolled his eyes. "I'm fairly certain that if she shows up, June isn't going to bring her Shirshu into the wedding hall." "Why not?" asked the tribesman. "We're letting Akela in." "That's because despite how big that wolf of yours has gotten, it's the only one of 2 who would be able to fit inside the hall, and is the only one who knows how to behave." Akela had finally stopped growing, reaching Sokka's shoulder. "And if June did let him in, she wouldn't let Nyla kill Naruto, not on what's supposed to be one of the happiest days of his life," he objected. "More like nerve-wracking than happy," the Fire Paragon said. "Trust me, Naruto. It will be happy in the end," the Fire Lord promised him. "I hope so. Naruto, I know that you've been firm about this ever since we got back," Sokka began, hesitating a little. "But we can still try to get some of the people from Konoha to the wedding, or at least, the wedding feast." "No," he said, his voice becoming firm. "My decision stays. no shinobi will ever come to the bending countries again. It was one of the first things he laid down when they had returned to helping with the creation of the fifth country, rejoining its building committee. He had a law passed for all of the countries that stated anything that dealt with the elemental countries as a whole, aside from what few trading routes there already were between the two continents, were forbidden. We've got enough problems on our hands, he told them, using that for a reason. We do not need any more that would come with shinobi. Despite what the rest of Team Paragon and Team Avatar thought about the law, the Earth King and the rest of the committee agreed with what he said and voted the law in. The shinobi also couldn't sneak in for a visit because Naruto had done something to the transportation seal that rendered incredibly long-ranged movements, such as from one continent to another, impossible. The tribesmen sighed in defeat. All right, I had to ask. No, you didn't, he curtly replied. Naruto, I thought you had made your peace with Konoha, Zuko said to him. I did, somewhat. His eyes wandered over to the nearby table where a pack of cigarettes and his lighter lay. He briefly considered reaching out and lighting one, but decided against it. Despite the fact it had been 2 years since they had come back, he still hadn't told anyone about the voice in his head that had been planted by the Kotoama Tsukumi. Look, I don't hate them if that's what you mean. But it's in everyone's best interests to keep the two continents separate from one another. Besides, you guys can still send letters, I know you've been doing that. He had been doing that himself with the other Jinchuriki who had come back with him. He had been quite surprised to learn that the Mizukage had married Utakata, which, apparently, had stemmed from a wild night that started with bar hopping and ended up in his bed. He had even stayed in contact with Gaara. It is better than nothing, Sokka admitted. He was corresponding regularly with Shikamaru. Each letter back and forth contained a shogi move within the correspondence, as both of them missed their games. That it is, the Fire Lord agreed before looking at the groom. By the way, Naruto, when is the next book coming out? The blonde smirked at that. Hoping to get a sneak peek, are you? Soon after they had returned from the elemental countries, Naruto had published his book. It was a modest success in both continents, which was enough for him to write a sequel. And with each book he published, the total number was currently at 3, the more successful they were becoming. He smiled in return. Can you blame me? They're quite addicting to read. Sokka nodded in agreement with that. He's right, Naruto. I'd say that if they keep going on like that, in some years, the copies that are autographed are going to be worth a fortune. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Funny, I thought that was already happening. The water paragon rolled his eyes. Fangirls don't count and you know it. That's a point to him. Zuko idly commented. That's because you still don't have any, last time I checked. The fire paragon retorted. And that's a point to you. The scarred dragon continued, keeping his facial expression and voice neutral. When both paragons gave him the same look of annoyance and exasperation, he couldn't help but crack a smile. Both Naruto and Sokka soon wore the same kind of smile and they laughed. Ah, Kami, I needed that, the blonde said as he gradually stopped laughing. Most of the tension he had been feeling was gone and he felt more relaxed now. That reminds me, we came in here to fetch you, Sokka said. We're now waiting on you. The relaxed feeling he had vanished and he felt nervous again. All right. We might as well start, he said, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The three of them walked over to the door. The blonde reached for the door and pulled it open, coming face to face with the leader of the Yuyan archers. My lord, Bao Yu saluted him as they stepped out of the room, Zuko closing the door behind them. Lieutenant Bao Yu, he said in reply, returning the salute. Are you ready? The archer struggled to keep a very dry smirk off of his face. With all due respect, my lord, but shouldn't I be asking you that question? Good point, he conceded, not hesitating to wear a grin on his face. Well, are you ready? As I'll ever be, he answered. So basically, not at all, Sokka commented with a sarcastic grin on his face. The blonde threw a glare at the tribesman. Keep it up, Sokka. I'll return the favor when you finally decide to marry Suki. He promised before he turned back to look at Baoyu. Let's get the ball rolling. The leader of the Yuyan archers nodded his acknowledgement and turned around. Honor guard, attention. He barked out. The archers, who had standing at ease alongside the walls, came to attention at the sound of his voice and formed a column on both sides of Naruto. They all marched down the hallway, Naruto in the middle with Zuko and Sokka trailing slightly behind. No one said a word as they marched to the wedding. Location, Royal Prison. Ozai sat against the wall of his cell, staring at nothing in particular. How long has it been since I've had a visit? He wondered briefly to himself. The only one he had was when the new Fire Lord had decided to grace him with said visit and inform him that his firstborn daughter, the one who he thought would succeed where his other children had failed him, was dead. That was maybe 10, 12, maybe even 14 years ago. Time had become a bit of a blur of him. But in the years he spent wallowing in this jail, he had time to think. He now realized that Yao Jing hadn't been the best of decisions. She was too wild, too hot-tempered, and too cruel to be a proper instrument of his will. And yet, she was the only one he had been left with after his other children betrayed him. I should have had that foreigner killed when I first heard of him. He thought to himself, his thoughts turning towards Naruto. It was because of him that Azula had weakened and betrayed her own father, cutting her hair off to symbolize it. However, while he could blame Azula on Naruto, and as much as he would have loved to pin it on his wife, the blame of Zuko solely belonged with him. Sometimes, he wondered what would have happened if he hadn't scarred and banished his son. Would he have become the instrument of his will that he had hoped to create? There's no use wondering of different paths. He told himself again and again, whenever his mind wandered down that path. What has happened has happened. In a way, he supposed he could be glad for what happened to his son. From what little he had learned over the years, the new Fire Lord was not weak or cowardly. Despite that fool idea of a new, fifth country, what idiocy, he had thought to himself when he heard of it. While he had never denied that the colonies had been a place of progress, they were still ruled by the Fire Nation and, by definition, Zuko led and protected the Fire Nation. And as much as he didn't want to believe it, he knew that his son had good counsel in the form of Iroh. His older brother had been better at everything they did. That was partly the reason why he had wanted the throne so much. The door to the cell opened, getting his attention. A guard walked in and stood before the bars. "Get up," he ordered. He simply looked up at the guard. "Has the time come for my execution come at last?" He wondered aloud. "Just get up," the guard repeated. "You've got visitors coming in to see you." He pulled the ring of keys off of his belt, found the right one, and opened the cell. Surprised by the news, Ozai didn't resist as the guard grabbed him by the arm, pulled him up to his feet, and marched him out of the cell. In silence they went down the hallways of the prison, their footsteps echoing all around them. A visitor? Thought Ozai. Who would want to visit me after all these years? He didn't dare to voice that question aloud. They stopped before a door, which the guard opened and walked the prisoner into. It was a small room, only roomy enough for a table and 2 chairs on either side. The chair on his side of the room had manacles attached to the arms, which were placed around his wrists once he sat down in the chair. The guard walked back out the door they had come in and closed it behind him, leaving Ozai alone in the room. Who will be the one who will walk through that other door? He thought to himself as he stared at said door. When it opened and his answer walked through it, he frowned. "I thought I told to never show yourself to me again," he said as his wife walked into the room and sat down in the chair opposite of him. "I would say how nice it is to see you as well, Ozai. But I would be lying." Ursa replied calmly. "Besides, you said that I had to leave the palace, not show myself to you again. But it doesn't matter now. You're in no position to tell me what to do." Indeed, I am not. He conceded. Why are you here, Ursa? Our son has been insisting that I visit you at least once before one of us dies. She answered with a slight distaste in her voice. You disapprove of such weakness. He noted, having caught the distaste. I only disapprove of the fact I have to speak to you again. She corrected him. Our son cares about the both of us, even if we dislike each other. He snorted. Such weakness, he stated with contempt. That weakness is the only thing that has let you live all these years. Ursa reminded him. Despite what the Avatar might say, it would have been better if you had been killed. And yet, I am still here. Unfortunately, she replied. They stayed silent for a few minutes, trying to stare the other down. It was Ozai who finally looked away. Try as he might, there was something about her gaze that made him want to look away. What is happening out in the world? He finally asked her, avoiding eye contact. Why would you want to know? She asked back. I hunger for news. I receive so little of it here. He shrugged his shoulders to emphasize his point about his surroundings. The fifth country has been established, its first city being constructed already. There was a twinge of excitement in her voice as she talked about it. He frowned at that. Foolishness, he declared. Why would they create a fifth country when the Fire Nation should rule all? It is our right. That had always been something he believed in. But apparently, his supposed wife did not share the sentiment. It is not our right. It has never been our right. It is no one's right. You shame your grandfather's memory by even thinking with that state of mind. Do not speak of Fire Lord Sozin like you knew him. He snapped at her, rage and fury filling his voice and the room. He would have been ashamed of what the Fire Nation has become. No, I think he would be ashamed of his son and his grandson. She replied in an equal tone of voice. It wasn't as loud or as angry as his, but her voice also had fury and rage in it. Sozin did not want to dominate the other countries, he wanted to unify them, in order to prevent what you and your father have done. He would be proud of Zuko and Aang for doing what he and Roku couldn't. How did Naruto manage to find you anyway? He asked, changing the subject. That had always been something he had wondered at times. After he had exiled Zuko, he became worried that Ursa would hear of it and try to return to poison him in revenge. So he decided to act preemptively and send people to look for her and kill her. But they never found her, so he wondered how his daughter's bodyguard was able to. I don't honestly know. She told him. He just showed up one day and reminded me of whom I was. And I'm sure your lover was real happy about that. He remarked acidly. It had always angered him that she loved that man over him. As she heard those words, she scowled. He has a name. She said to Ozai, her voice becoming laced with anger again. And we both know you know what it is. A small smirk appeared on his face, pleased at her anger. Ikem, wasn't it? I suppose that you, he, and whatever spawn the two of you have created are living happily. The anger on her face was replaced by sadness. He and my daughter, Ki, died 2 months before Naruto found me, from a sickness that swept through the village. She answered simply. Again, there was silence in the room. If you are waiting for me to say I am sorry about what I said, you will be sorely disappointed. He told her, breaking the silence. You are my wife. The wife of the Fire Lord should not go about having lovers and bastard children. You have no place to talk about that, Ozai, not with Yao Jing. And we were all but divorced in name when I left the capital. She said in reply, the sadness leaving and the anger returning. So do not speak of lovers and bastards to me. I don't leave the other parent of my child burned and scarred just because they wanted to see her for a single day. He grimaced at those words. What he did that day had earned him the disapproval of everyone in his family. When Azula had found out about the child growing in Chun's womb, he told Ozai that one of two things were going to happen. He would either take the child from its mother and raise it in the palace, or he would be cast out of the royal family and take care of the child on the streets. Naturally, he didn't want it to be cast out of the family, so he took the child, gave her a name, and raised her in the palace. When Chun had asked to see her, he had thought that one day would lead to another, and another, and another, until finally, she would have tried to keep Yao Jing for herself. So, he took steps. But, as with Yao Jing, he had come to the conclusion that those wasn't the steps he should have taken. If I had let her see her daughter, would Yao Jing have turned out differently? He had often wondered. But again, what was done was done. There was nothing he could do to change it. Let us agree on this then. I will not speak ill of your dead, and you will not speak ill of mine. He offered, willing to give a small truce. Very well, she said, agreeing to the offered truce. I will admit that what happened with Yao Jing was not one of my better decisions. I should have reined her in when she was younger. There were a lot of things that you should have done when the children were younger. She replied with some small bite in her voice. He narrowed his eyes at her. We both know that I am not entirely blameless there, Ursa. You made your fair share of mistakes with them as well. He reminded her. She held his gaze for a minute before sighing and looking down at the table. I know. She admitted. I know that we've made mistakes with our children. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if things had gone differently. What has happened has happened. He told her firmly. There is nothing we can do to change that. That may be true. But, don't you ever wonder what would have happened if we had made different choices? She asked him, her voice questioning and her face curious. No, I do not. He was lying. Wondering what would have happened was something that filled his time in this prison. But he wasn't going to let her know that. She would never have the pleasure of knowing that he had done the same as she. I may have realized that I have made mistakes and I do regret some of them. I have never wondered what would have happened if things went differently. There's nothing we can do about it, so why would we even bother? She shook her head in slight exasperation. There's the man I married and grew to despise. She remarked with a small, dignified roll of her eyes. I always did prefer you to go back to the way things had been in the beginning. And what does that mean? He asked with an arched eyebrow. How are things different in the beginning? You actually tried to be a father to our children. She said. Somehow, her voice almost had an accusing tone to it. Now he knew what she meant. Yes, I supposed I did try in the beginning. But things changed, and as I said before, I am not entirely blameless for that. He reminded her. I know. She stood up from the chair. We weren't really good parents, Ozai. She said as she walked back to the door she came in from. But perhaps we can be decent grandparents. What? He asked, having not expected that kind of a response. But he got his answer when Ursa opened the door and allowed someone else to walk in. Azula? He asked. It was his former daughter who had come into the room. But she was different now. She was no longer a girl, she was a woman in her own right. In fact, despite the fact that her hair still remained short, she looked like a younger version of Ursa. But her golden eyes held no warmth for him. Rather, they told him that she didn't really want to be here. Ozai, she said, her voice curt and short. I want you to meet someone. Her eyes traveled downward and lit up with warmth and happiness. He followed her gaze and finally realized that she had been carrying a toddler at her side, with red hair, golden eyes much like her, and wore a happy and innocent smile. This is Sozan Uzumaki, your grandson. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.